pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I need a motion to adopt the agenda. Moved by Leonetti, supported by Kraft. Please vote. Motion passes 11-0. Approval of the minutes dated October 17th, 2018. Motion by Lucido, supported by Romano. Please vote. Motion passes 11-0. Public participation. Does anyone wish to be heard? Anyone wish to be heard? Seeing none, we'll close public participation. Elections update. We'll call up Mr. Owens from GCSI. GCSI.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for having me today. I'll try to be as quick as possible because I know that most of you are following the elections statewide pretty closely, especially here in Macomb, and have probably heard plenty and maybe answer some questions and talk a little bit about what to expect based on election results in lame duck and into next year. House and Senate are very much Republican right now, 63-47 in the House, 27-11 in the Senate. Of course, Republican Governor, AG, and Secretary of State. The polling and I would say that the election in 2018 is very unique in the sense that we're very much operating in a new political map, if you will, under President Trump. Areas that have traditionally been battleground seats and battleground places have become maybe a little bit more solidified in the Republican column, and other places that have traditionally been battleground places have maybe slid and solidified on the Democratic side. I'd say, typically when you start to look at the map in a House election, you will look at various spots in the state. Northern Michigan, very much a back and forth of Republicans and Democrats over the last 60 years. Macomb County, very much, the current delegation is half and half in the House, and it looks to remain so heading into the next election or heading into the next 2 years. I'd say places where you're seeing some of the larger slides in Oakland County, in cities like Kalamazoo, Grand Rapids, and a lot of that activity is impacting more, I'd say, Senate elections than House elections. The Senate Republicans have to deal with cities like Kalamazoo, Pontiac, Muskegon, Grand Rapids. These are cities that are not the approval rating for the president is lower than it is in some of these House districts, where in the House, the district in Kalamazoo, for example, is just a Kalamazoo proper district, very heavily Dem-based district. The House doesn't have to deal with that volatility heading into this election. They have a rural seat right next to that in Portage that's very much in play, and a coin flip, if you will. But the advantage in the House is that most of these districts that are traditionally battleground places, Republicans are faring very well. Like I said, rural Muskegon area, Monroe County, a lot of parts of Macomb County. So it'll be very interesting. I think that most would agree that the House is in play. The Democrats need to pick up 8 seats to get to 55 for a split, 9 seats to take it over There's a path there, but it's very difficult. And of course, at 27-11 in the Senate, it'd be very difficult for the Democrats to take back the Senate. But again, as I mentioned, the Senate is dealing with a different map because of some of those populated cities. On the statewide elections, everyone sees the polls, everyone sees what's being reported in the free press and the news and others, that this is nationally a Democratic year. Whether or not that translates all the way into November 6th is yet to be seen. So I'm certainly not going to make any predictions, but I will say that as almost a segue, the election results in the House and Senate and the governor's race especially will have an immediate and direct impact on what happens in lame duck. So Republicans have held control since 2010 of essentially everything in Lansing. And as this election has come, I would say they have taken several steps, and not just the chambers and the administration, but the business community as well, and other stakeholders, to prepare for a changing of the guard and change of the regime. One example of that, of course, is a recent bill that was passed that put a rules commission in place to oversee DEQ rule promulgation. This was pushed by the business community. It was a replica of what they did in Indiana, but for the most part, it was put in place to make sure that should the administration change, the DEQ would not have the ability to promulgate any rule without going through this kind of third-party commission, which includes membership of the MMA, the chamber, and also environmental groups like the Michigan Environmental Council and others, but certainly favorable to the business community's interests. And that is how it moved through. That is one example of several bills, I would say, that on both sides, and certainly not necessarily in a partisan way, that have been prepared over the last year and a half as this administration kind of comes to an end. And so the governor has made clear that he has a few priorities for lame duck and doesn't necessarily want to talk about much more than that, but he really wants a tipping fee. Right now, tipping fees on solid waste is around 37 cents per ton. I think that is much lower than the national average, pretty significantly lower than the national average for solid waste facilities. But I think overall the governor's position is that the DEQ is underfunded, and that before he leaves office, he's going to try to do what he can to get some of these fees and some of these things that fund the DEQ, including several new regulations around lead and copper. That rule was put in place and most likely going to be very expensive for local units of government to implement. This was a rule that was put in place, wholly by the administration, and they realized that in order to implement some of this more stringent water quality type activity, recycling activity that he'd like to see, and other activity, that he's got to get some money for the DEQ, which will include a couple fee increases. In a fully Republican legislature, that's not an easy bill to get done. And so I say that as another example of the election will dictate 100% of what happens in lame duck. Should the administration flip? Should the House flip? Should the Senate flip? Even the Secretary of State or Attorney General races, there will be bills that move based on who wins those races, based on because it is one party control right now. So I'm happy to talk about anything in lame duck and the elections. I also brought handouts of the three ballot proposals that you'll see. Obviously, the two that have been the main focus, of course, are recreational marijuana The ballot initiative essentially creates a 10% excise tax on marijuana to be regulated like alcohol. That's their slogan, not mine. They allow for the medical infrastructure that's being put in place right now by the state to essentially be grandfathered in to the recreational infrastructure and go through 1 year of rule promulgation before any medical marijuana facility could transition to a recreational marijuana facility or a new recreational marijuana facility could be opened. Cities, local units of government, unlike in medical where they have to proactively opt in to the system, cities actually have to, or local units of government actually have to opt out of recreational marijuana activity. They still maintain zoning authorities and policing authorities. I'm going to hand this to Commissioner Kraft, if that's all right, and he can just pass these around.
Oh, I thought you were handing the microphone too.
You can definitely give the
I was like, well, aren't you too chummy?
No. There's a lot of activity in Lansing and has been for some time now surrounding kind of the marijuana infrastructure and how this is all pieced together. I'm sure you all hear about it. I'm sure you all see it as it's developing in and around the localities. The current infrastructure allows for a 3% excise tax on top of a 6% sales tax. That's the medical side. If this passes, it's polling anywhere, depending on who you're talking to, high 40s to high 50s. If this passes, the medical tax goes away, so patients will still be able to access medicine for a 0% tax. But any product bought in a recreational shop will be taxed at the 10% level. Those dollars, and you can see the breakdown in the packet that I passed out, has a breakdown for local units of government, schools, roads, etc. The ballot initiative summaries were put together by the Citizens Research Council, so they're not slanted one way or the other. Any questions on the marijuana piece before I go to the next ballot initiative?
Commissioner Duge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Gary, thank you for being here. Question, how are they planning on getting around the federal law, or whatever you want to call it, about banking and how they're going to process this business as far as marijuana goes? Is the federal government still looking at this as an illegal enterprise and confiscating all money, or how are they getting around this?
That's if I had the answer to that, I would not be here before you. The answer to how they're going to get around it is that certain banks are going to be willing to take the risk. And they're willing to take the risk based on the state charter essentially remaining intact and the state regulators working really carefully with the banks on each marijuana-based account that they take. So, for example, the state of Colorado right now is probably, these are examples that come from the department, 85% banked. And the way that it's banked is that these banks take the risk, so that there's a little bit higher return for the banks on those accounts. They partner with the state regulators 100%, and they open up these accounts to the state regulators, and as soon as the compliance on the tax side or on the reporting side or what is matching up, because they're monitoring everything that comes from the grow all the way down to those point of sale systems. As soon as that goes out and there's an outlier, the bank has the right, of course, to shut down that account. And it allows for a level of compliance that can get, for the most part, regulators comfortable. They're not getting their they still have to deal with the Fed system, but they're not getting shut down, et cetera, as long as they are really close with state regulators and staying as compliant as possible. So they're trying to work through that piece of it. It is surely the most complex piece of the whole thing.
Thank you, Gary, because after everything is said and done, I think this is going to be one of the main problems going forward with approval of this ballot proposal, that this has not been addressed as far as some of the problems that federally are going to be coming up. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And the first one you spoke about is an initiative, correct? Are the others both constitutional amendments?
The first one, I believe, is a constitutional amendment. I think there's two constitutional amendments, and then the third one, which is the get out the vote one, is an initiative, I believe.
No, that one is, it says amend Article 2 of Section 4 of the Michigan Constitution. So you're saying that the medical marijuana one is, that's a constitutional amendment?
I believe it is.
So all of these would be constitutional
No,
amendments?
so I apologize. The marijuana one, and it is recreational marijuana, not medical, is a voter-initiated law.
Okay, it's an initiative.
It is.
Okay. Okay.
So Proposal 3 is the constitutional amendment, amending Article 2, Section 4.
Okay, and the redistricting is not a constitutional amendment?
I believe that is as well.
Okay. And I've been asked
It
to
is.
ask you if you could email us copies of what you gave us, because
Yeah, it's a
I
mess.
guess-
I apologize.
Yeah.
The printer, we tried to do it too long story. So
Okay,
I apologize for that, and I will email it right after this.
okay. All right, okay, thank you. You can continue on.
Sure. So I thought, and one of the reasons why I wanted to make sure I had some of this in front of me was when you get down to that third initiative. I think the second initiative is not as jam-packed, but there is a lot of stuff into it. Of course, it deals with redistricting and deals with how the lines of the state are drawn. It establishes a bipartisan commission, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I believe it's 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats, and 5 and 5, and a couple independents. So they establish a commission that would get together and essentially redraw the lines based on certain data and certain criteria. Obviously, that's a big deal with the 2020 census just around the corner. The last 2 maps have been drawn under Republican control, so that it'll be very interesting should that pass, and based on the electoral makeup as you head into 2020, what that process looks like.
And that does not apply to county commissioners, does it? It only applies at the state level?
Correct. I believe that only believes to congressional and state House and Senate districts.
Okay, I don't have any speakers listed, so if you want to go ahead and touch on the third one, that's fine.
Sure. So the third one is jam-packed with several pieces, which includes, and I'm sorry, I got everything mixed up here, but they allow for military service members to vote, which I believe is already law. It allows for straight party ticket. It automatically registers folks at the Secretary of State, and allows for anytime you can register to vote anytime with proof of residency, provides all registered voters access to the absentee ballot for any reason, and ensures the accuracy and integrity of elections by auditing the election. So they put a lot in here, which, I don't want to have too much commentary on it, but can oftentimes lead to some confusion. It'll be really interesting on that. The third one is actually polling the lowest of the three. So we'll see about whether or not that third one is able to get through.
Okay, I don't see any speakers. Nobody has any questions? Did you have anything else you wanted to cover?
Yeah, so I would just close quickly on lame duck. There's going to be a supplemental appropriations bill, which is the major focus right now, I would say, of our advocacy efforts. As you all know, we've put a pretty significant effort to try and get some community mental health dollars returned to the county for several reasons, and also obviously roads. Those are still the two biggest priorities, to try to deliver dollars back to the county in those two areas. This supplemental is going to be, from what we're seeing, pretty significant. And as I mentioned, the governor's priority, the governor's number one priority are those tipping fees. And should the legislature want to put things that maybe are not on the governor's radar, as he would say, or on his agenda, they're going to have to talk about tipping fees. And should they come to some of those agreements, the supplemental will be a great vehicle by which we can attack on behalf of the county in those two areas. And I would say that any conversations that commissioners are having with the delegation, there's only 4 weeks of work left in this 2-year cycle. The last 2-year cycle, I believe over 40% of the bills passed in those 12 days. Several of them will be normal procedural type activity that's just been clogged up and will move through. But this supplemental offers a pretty unique opportunity where you have, I believe it's 2/3 of the Senate, term limited, half the House, and of course the administration. So I would encourage folks to talk to the delegation and then talk to folks as they're, because obviously you'll see them all through the election season, as they head back to Lansing. Make sure they know that we're really trying to do what we can in that supplemental for community mental health dollars and for roads.
Thank you. And does everybody know what tipping fees are? I don't think so.
I'm sorry. Sure. So solid waste tipping fees are what is charged at a municipal or private landfill when waste is dropped off, and only 37 cents is collected and remitted to the state per ton. The governor originally came out and asked for $4.75 to be the number. These fees haven't been raised in decades, but there's also a balance on, at some point you get to a certain level where it's not economically feasible to dispose of waste as well. And so there's a balance there, and that conversation is happening. So the governor, together with the Michigan Chamber and some others, are pushing really hard to try and get some sort of increase from that 37 cents number. I don't think anybody knows what that number is going to look like. I certainly know that the governor wants it to be at least over $1, but again, led at that $4.75 number. And the solid waste community is pushing back pretty significantly. And for the most part, all they need to do is run out the clock for 4 weeks and restart the conversation, of course, which will be a conversation ongoing until those fees are adjusted a little bit. They are one of the lowest in the country. So.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Kraft.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hey, Gary, how are you?
Good, how are you?
So Bill Schuette wins. You got to imagine that it's going to be pretty status quo in the House and the Senate. If Gretchen Whitmer wins, that means it also could be a domino effect, and the House loses some, Republicans lose some seats in the House, which could happen anyway. I imagine the Senate probably stays Republican majority, but either way, things are going to happen in lame duck. It's either going to be fast and furious or it's going to be a little bit slower. What are you going to do for us, for the Board of Commissioners, in terms of when legislation comes up that affects us? Like, what's the notification process? You know, what if a new bill gets introduced during lame duck? Are you going to tell us then? Are you going to tell us when it gets out of committee? You know, there's a whole process here. So when would you notify us if something important was coming down the pipe and then we had to, you know, rally our reps and senators?
Yeah, so I was actually just had a really good conversation with Marilyn Lane from the county executive's office about this, and there will be, to your point, hundreds of bills introduced the day after the election. We will make sure that the chair's office receives all of those introductions with some highlighted bills, and we'll be able, I believe, pretty quickly to get back here. I would hope that we could maybe come back even that first week of lame duck, because most of the quote-unquote mischief will be introduced the day after the election, and we'll have 2.5 weeks before lame duck begins, right? November 26th is when lame duck begins. My thought would be, you know, to come back here and you know, in that time period, try and put, you know, the things in place to make sure that folks know what's going on. I don't anticipate, and I, you know, was speaking with Marilyn about this. I don't anticipate a fast and furious type lame duck because I'm not sure what there is left to do. The Republicans have accomplished their agenda for the last 8 years. They've been very successful in the tax code, accomplishing what they set out to do. I don't, you know, there's some specific things, and I also think there's some specific things that have been introduced and aimed for lame duck that aren't going to pass, maybe including the exemption from personal property tax from the utilities on new build, a new activity there. That's one that they've been watching. So I don't anticipate a really volatile lame duck. And it would take, I think, a pretty significant change in the House, Senate, and the governor's office in order to get there. So, yeah, I guess to answer your question, we would come back for our fourth quarter report maybe that first week or that Monday before they really rev up so that everybody's aware and what folks are playing defense on. My preference would be to play offense. My preference would be to get a resolution or something on the record from the commission calling for community mental health dollars in that supplemental appropriation bill. My preference would be to get some stuff on the record from the commission requesting the legislature put more money in roads in that supplemental appropriations bill, and not try to fall into kind of the Michigan Association of Counties role of here's these 300 bills and here's how it impacts, right, counties across the state, and, you know, here's the ways to fix them. And we'll certainly be engaged throughout all that stuff. But, you know, I really would prefer to try to play some offense and try and get into that supplemental bill and probably several others that I think we can do.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Sager?
Excuse me. Gary, were you invited, or did you have knowledge when we had all the Macomb County contingent here for a Shoot the Breeze meeting with the senators and the state reps? Did you have any knowledge of that at all?
I heard about it. I don't know if I heard about it before or after.
Next time we have it, I hope you're invited. And we don't make it once a year. We have it a couple times a year, and it really worked out well. I thought it did. And so I hope the next time we do it shortly after the election, we get them all over here.
That's great. That, you know, it's going to be a new delegation in several ways. There's a, you know, competitive Senate seat that's happening, and so we, you know, obviously look forward to working with the whole new delegation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Myjack? All right, I don't see any more speakers. Is there a motion to oh, you're sneaky. You took it off and put it back on. Commissioner Brown.
Who in the Macomb County delegation is interested in introducing a bill to back fund the community mental health?
So
'Cause there should be something already written, right?
No, so the community mental health piece, it's not a policy change that needs to happen. It's just a pure appropriations piece. And you know the way the appropriations process works, you have to almost barnacle on to the larger bill as it moves through the process. And so we know that the supplemental, it's been the tradition of the administration to keep the supplementals relatively tight, right? So they don't want a lot of pet projects on there. They don't want to have a lot of in-district type, specific district type projects. They'd like to keep it to transfers to departments and stuff like that. But the reality is that with that supplemental in lame duck, there's an opportunity to get priorities put into there, and the Macomb delegation deserves a ton of credit during this appropriations process for coming together. They put a letter together. Every single member signed it. They presented it to the speaker and to the majority leader, demanding more dollars for community mental health, and we only got $1 million of the $5 million request, and we're hoping to get another $3 to $4 million in the supplemental. But with the appropriations process, you essentially just have to take the opportunities as they roll. So there's 2 or 3, 4 appropriations bills a year. This will be the 4th.
Do you sense any opportunity was going to throw a Hail Mary pass and something to do with them with Act 51 and try to really do something dramatic with the road funding?
I wish I could say yes. The way that the power is structured in the House and Senate, they're not gonna look at a bill that's gonna divert road funding from their districts and send it to Southeast Michigan. It's going to be a very interesting conversation in January, regardless of who wins. Both gubernatorial candidates have made it clear they want to fix the roads. They want to figure out what to do as far as road funding, and including looking at new revenue, and whether that's going to be legislatively, whether they're going to have to go out and put a penny on the sales tax or manipulate the gas tax somehow at the ballot in 2020. All those things will be discussed in January. So I don't see any sweeping road policy changing in lame duck, but I do see an opportunity for a pretty large chunk of money and revenue coming in that supplemental for roads. And again, I think it's a priority to get the delegation to make sure that Macomb's getting as much as they can.
Thank you, Gary.
Okay, can I get a motion? Can I get a motion to receive and file? Moved by Gillette, supported by Sauger. Commissioner Leonetti.
And one last question, Gary. You were just kind of touching upon it. So, with this appropriations, you were talking about mental health, getting maybe another $3 million for mental health. What's the estimate that you think we could get for roads?
I mean, I wouldn't want to say that the $3 million is an estimate for mental health. It's certainly a target.
Okay.
And I don't know how they plan to handle the roads. I would assume what they'll do is they're going to look at new revenues based on what Treasury is estimating, based on what they believe they have to spend, and then they're also going to have a conversation about whether or not they want to touch that budget stabilization fund, right? So they have $1 billion setting aside in the rainy day fund, in the budget stabilization fund. And again, I don't want to get political or put a value on anything, but should a Gretchen Whitmer win, the decision that the Republicans will have to make is, do they want to leave her $1 billion to spend?
Okay.
Or do they want to spend it themselves? Do they want to put restrictions on how you can spend that money? Do they want to put more accountability in? And those are the type of bills you would see should there be a shift, right? You're going to see a bunch of bills that add accountability, reporting requirements, metrics, things that ensure that it's more difficult to spend those dollars outside of certain parameters. If it's status quo, Republicans maintain everything, I would assume the stabilization fund won't get touched too much, and the new administration will just inherit a pretty large surplus.
Okay.
So that's a major piece, though, because if they do decide to get into the budget stabilization fund, there'll be major opportunities to fund some things, especially if they decide to put half of that $1 billion into roads, or something like that, and the other half into schools. And
obviously your job would be to get as many of those dollars from Macomb County.
You got it.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other speakers, please vote. Motion passes 13-0. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you for the time.
Okay, net budget changes. Finance Director Steve Smeagol.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Good to see you again, as always. So what we have on the agenda today, you should have a two-page document. Hopefully, we're all starting on the same page, which is the general fund first, hopefully. And during the course of this budget cycle, there's been much discussion about the budget increasing 6%. And I've been up here before saying that, you know, there are certain types of funds where the budget should be going up. Revenues are going up. Roads is an example. General fund's an example to a degree. And so what I thought I'd do is try to put these two schedules together to try to show and demonstrate how after you account for new revenues, the budget's not going up, the net budget is not going up 6%. So if we start out with the general fund, I think one of the reasons that the budget will show that it's going up 6% across all funds is that there have been several amendments to the general fund budget since we submitted the recommend. So you're comparing the 2018 recommend budget with the 2018 amended with the 2019 recommend. So you'll see on the left-hand portion of this schedule, the far left-hand column, we start out with the amended budget as of 8/31, which is also the amended budget that's included in the budget document that you've had before you for a couple of months. The second column there are adjustments that have come before you between August 31st and September 30th, or at least what we posted to the general ledger after August 31st. You'll see that those adjustments increased spending by a net of about $7.5 million. The next column would be the adjustments that we still need to bring to you before the end of the year. I've mentioned this to you on a number of occasions. We've got property tax increases. I've noted them down at the bottom. I think they're fairly self-explanatory. And the next column is what we expect the final amended budget to be, both on the revenue side and the expense side. So total revenues will, on a budgetary basis, be just over $231 million. The budgeted expenses will be just over $231 million. We're expecting a budgetary surplus of just over $46,000. This number ties into the forecast that I provided you a week or so ago for the year end. And at that time, I also indicated that we always have budgetary savings, and that I'm expecting a surplus somewhere a little over $4 million. I think it was about 4.3. So if we then talk as our starting point of being the 2018 amended, and we look at the 2019 recommend, 2018 amended, 2019 recommend, you'll see I've put a column in there for reconciling items. And what this is intended to demonstrate is what would the 19 budget look like if certain things, primarily the MIDC fund and the turnover factor, were not in play for 2019. What we would have to do is, or what it would have looked like, I should say, is reimbursement revenue would be $1 million higher, or $1.1 million. The operating expenses would be $3.8 million higher in the general fund. That would have been the amount of attorney fees that are now accounted for in the MIDC fund. The transfer out to the special revenue funds would be lower because the MIDC fund wouldn't be a separate fund. Those three items, all the items labeled G, are budget neutral. Item H, under full-time wages. What I'm trying to account for there is the reduction in the turnover factor from 5% of payroll to 3.5% of payroll. We did that in 2019 because we know we're spending, we're filling positions quicker, it appears, than we have in the past. What I'm trying to net out is, or demonstrate is, we didn't add $1 million of new positions. We're reducing a turnover factor. We didn't increase headcount by other than the positions that we have previously discussed through the whole budget cycle, which are in.
Can I stop
incorporated.
you for just
Sure.
a second? Because I don't know what you're talking about. I'm looking for the item A, B, C. Where am I?
Down at the bottom, the little footnote.
Oh, it's, okay, okay,
Are you with me?
I couldn't find the letters on the page, so.
Oh, okay.
So without that, I was, okay, I got it now, thank you.
So again, the adjustment for the turnover factor is simply to indicate that we're not adding $1 million in positions over and above what we've already included. So at the end of the day, so to speak, the adjusted budget for 2019, $238.6 million of revenue, $246 million of expenses, and you'll see to the far right column, revenues are going up 3.3%, expenses are going up 6.7%. The net budget in the general fund is going up, I would submit to you, 3.4%. Again, accounting for new revenues that can be, spent down or spent on ongoing expenses. If you then go to the next page, this is demonstrating what that looks like across all funds. And the number of 6%, I'm not sure where that exactly came from, but I have an idea, and I think that's on one of the slides of my budget presentation in August. I had this very same schedule across all funds, and without taking into account new revenues and budget adjustments, the bottom line was 6.7. So I'm guessing that's where that came from, and assuming that's the case, then you'll see at the bottom of this page, far right-hand bottom corner in green, I'm going to suggest to you that the budget is going up less than 1% across all funds when you take into account new revenues that are available to spend. We've just talked about the general fund going up 3.4%. The other major funds that I wanted to discuss, which are having the most impact on this, are all the other ones that are highlighted in yellow. We briefly talked about the elimination of the MIDC fund if that wasn't in play for 2019. But most significantly, you'll see the roads. And I mentioned this last week. The actual gross budget, gross expenditures in the roads are going up about $32 million, or if you just look at that line item, it's 25%. They have new revenue coming in of about $30 million. That revenue is meant to be spent. It should be spent. It's a special revenue fund. And those monies are intended to be spent. So if you net out or account for the new revenue, I would submit to you that the road budget's going up 2.1%, not 25. Same thing with the mental health fund. Expenses are going up about $10 million. Revenues are going up about the same amount. So I'm saying actually revenues are going down, or they'll have a reduction. The debt service fund, again, we've had an accounting change. Our debt service requirements have not gone down, but the transfer to the debt service fund is not going to happen in 2019. We had to move the activity for the OPEB bonds into an internal service fund, which is not a budgeted fund. So, again, this is just trying to make it, adjust for what the debt service requirements are, and they're actually going up a little bit, and they fluctuate around $100,000 a year, give or take at what maturity year it is. So that was the extent of my presentation. I'm just trying to, again, make it kind of a crosswalk between gross to net. So if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
Yes, there are questions. Thank you. Commissioner Gillette.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Steve, for the presentation. This does do a lot to illuminate the overall budget, and so I appreciate it very greatly. I guess the one question I still have is, if we had no fund balance of any sort, we're starting at zero, would the increase in revenues that we're getting from both road funding and from the increase in property taxes and all the new increases in revenues, will those cover the 2019 proposed budget? In other words, or do we need to dip into fund balance for a dime, $1 million? You know, if we didn't have a fund balance, could we afford this budget?
No. So if we had no fund balance in the roads, for example, we would have to reduce spending by about a couple $1 million. Because their expenses are going up 32 million, and in our example, the revenue is going up by 30. So we'd have $30 million to spend. There's something similar going on in the general fund, outside of capital projects.
So outside of roads and capital projects,
Yeah.
we are still spending more than we're taking in. When you
In
add
the general
all the
fund, I
revenues.
think for 2019, it's in the range of $1.5 million. Now, that kind of corrects itself as you go out a couple of years, but
Well,
Yeah,
it's too hard to predict what's going to happen
Right.
in next couple of years. I can only make determinations on what's
Right.
happening now.
right.
And I guess that's still my concern. You know, despite all the new revenues, despite all these additional assets, despite the tax increase that's funding the roads, we're still proposing spending more than we're taking in when all is said and done. And I
Right.
guess that's still my concern.
Right.
But this is an outstanding presentation.
I appreciate your comments, Commissioner. I think what I'll say is, if you go back to the first page on the general fund, where I've showed that the revenues are going up 3.3.
Yeah.
And I've broken out the 6.7% increase in expenses between what I'll just refer to normal operating versus the capital projects. And the normal operating expenses are going up by 4.2%. So there's about a 0.9% gap there. That's what I'm saying. It's, you know,
Right.
we
We're-
would still be drawing down on
Ultimately, we're still spending
Little
more than
bit,
we're
a
taking
little
in.
bit.
So if we could cut it a little bit, that'd be great. All right,
But
thank you.
I'm glad this helps, because it,
It does help. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Carabelli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Steve, got to ask you a question. Page 9 of our package,
page
And-
9.
or second page of what you passed out.
Okay.
You go from the bottom of your highlighted bars, you go up to roads, just above the roads. Please explain to me, Register of Deeds Technology Fund.
It's always been there.
I understand it's always been there. Thank you, Commissioner Brown. With that said, please explain to me those regulated funds that are in there and what they can be spent for.
Technology for Register of Deeds office.
That is correct. So my question is, those cannot be used for anything else, correct?
To my knowledge, no.
And I believe you are correct with that as well. Answer me this question. The technology was done in the capital projects with all the new computer stuff that was put into the clerk's office for all that technology that we took out of the general fund and that we bonded for. We paid for it either out of the general fund capital projects or out of bonding. Yet we could have went into here, figured out what the cost is for the clerk's office, because that's all that can be used for, and utilize those, correct?
Yeah, this fund can be utilized for technology in the
So
Register of
do we
Deeds.
have time on what was going on and what we had in this project that we can take that out of that fund? Because legally, that's what it was used for, is the clerk's office for those specific computers or whatever that department that puts into those that they're charging for. Therefore, it's not coming out of the general fund, and you're utilizing that $1.2 million that can't be spent on anything else.
Well, we could look into it, I guess, then you'd be looking at projects in the future coming out of the
And
general
I'm
fund.
not looking at projects in the future, I'm looking
Yeah.
at the work that we did. It should have came out of that fund, because that's all that fund can be used for.
I would say that maybe it should have, I don't know that for sure.
Okay.
But, I mean, we can try to research it, but I'm not gonna stand here and say for sure that
Okay,
it should have come out
so
of the
I'm
fund.
asking the questions because I
Right.
believe it could have, and I think it maybe still can be done. So I would implore you to take a look at that and see if it costs $400,000 for that portion of the IT that was done over in the clerk's office, that it should have came out of there and not either out of the bonding or the general fund. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Romano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, Steve.
Hi.
Just very quickly, Mr. Carabelli just to add something on there, and if in fact it did, I think we ought to get it back and put it back in where it belongs. Okay, just a thought. I'm looking at your and incidentally, this is, I think you've made it too simple. That's why we're all asking these questions. When you make it complicated, we didn't understand it. This makes it very simple, and I'm looking at your revenue part here, A, B, C, D, E, all the way down at the bottom here. It's on page 8 of my page. I don't
So
know if you
you're talking about the general fund, right?
Yes.
Yes.
You're talking about property tax increases. Where did you come up with these figures of 3.5 versus 2.0 budgeted? By the same token, down on D, which is a real estate transfer tax estimated at 4.3 million versus 3.0 budgeted. Where are you coming up with these numbers at? My question is, nice numbers, what if? What if those numbers don't come to pass? What do we do now? And where did you get those numbers at, the
The
percentages?
2018 numbers are a known number based on known taxable values,
Okay,
so that's a hard number. The revenue for the real estate transfer tax is based on actual trends through September 30th, as well as looking back at trends for the last 3 or 4 years in October, November, and December.
which we've enjoyed tremendous
Correct.
growth and so forth. So again, my concern is the same thing. What happens if? And we're looking at, and hopefully this prosperity continues for another 20
Right.
years.
And
I'll be
again-
long gone, but if it doesn't,
Right.
I don't want to see us getting into the jackpot because we're banking on money that we're anticipating we're going to receive.
Right.
And it ain't coming.
Right.
And I see that happening now in the real estate market that is starting to slow down, and I'm a little concerned about those numbers coming up percentage-wise to what it's going to be. So where do we get the money when we don't have it? That's what concerns me. It's rhetorical, but anyway, that's where my concern is at. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Steve, I think that you sent in to our offices an updated 5-year capital plan. If you remember last week, we were going through numbers and there were some different numbers. Would it be possible for you to highlight the changes on here?
Yeah, the short answer is yes.
Okay, okay.
I know you
don't-
like short answers, so I'll just,
I don't need that today, but I'm trying, it's hard for me to go through and figure, I was trying to take notes, if you remember last time. Unfortunately, I took notes on the document Crystal prepared, and it doesn't exactly match the other documents on the
yeah,
line
I
items.
think the most one that sticks out to me was we reduced the prosecutor's office scanning project by 122,500. It was 322.5, and now we lowered it to 200. That's the most significant one that I can remember.
Okay,
And I think we retitled the last one that was under veterans for the kiosks for the shared services. I just named it various departments. And I took out the funding revenue from the veterans fund of 65,000.
so the current plan on the old one was 11,225, and the new one is 11,713, 11 million. Do you see what I'm talking about?
No, I don't.
Okay, so-
Oh, you mean under the
The
top portion?
Yes.
Yeah, the top portion. So what changed as well was I put in number 32, which is a $500,000 contingency
Okay.
each year. That changed as well.
Okay, so
I'll highlight those and send
highlight
over.
it for me. Thank you. I
Yep, absolutely.
appreciate it. And Commissioner Leonetti?
Thank you. Steve, on your expenditures for wages, does that factor in the positions asked by the sheriff's department?
In 2019?
Yes.
Yes.
It does, okay. And that includes the overtime that would be potentially reduced then too, as well? I mean, your
Yes.
number here, full-time wages, includes overtime in that number.
Includes overtime, chip, yeah, everything.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yep.
Commissioner Duche?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Steve, question. How different is this from the original budget that was submitted to us?
This? The only
Yes.
thing that's gonna differ is the adjustment for the turnover factor. Because the other items G, all account for the change in the MIDC fund, which are budget neutral.
Right.
And it accounts for the new, the only change on this schedule is the adjustment for the turnover factor, which is just as an
That's
out.
kind of,
And we're not adjusting it, it's just trying to show that if we'd put a 3% turnover factor or 3.5 in the 2018 budget, or left the 2019 at 5%, wages wouldn't be going up as much.
but other than that, so this is more realistic than what was originally presented. The
And
numbers
yes,
are
it
more
is. It's a more
realistic.
realistic comparison only because
It's solid numbers.
The budget that was prepared and submitted to you in August was as of August, and a number of things have happened since then.
Right,
So it's more of a real-time update.
right. So this is actually what is happening as of now.
And it's accounting for revenues, which the schedule I put in the budget presentation didn't account for new revenues.
When are you going to be doing your presentation for the fourth quarter?
The fourth quarter, so I gave you an update a week ago on the
Right.
projection.
Right,
Probably, I think, going to have a finance committee till the end of November.
okay.
So you'll have the full quarterly report then.
All right, very good.
And I'll know better then if my 4.3 forecast is kind of still holding true, and, we'll have some October numbers, back to Commissioner Romano's question about transfer tax and things like
Right.
that.
Well, a lot of this will be solidified. All right, very good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Steve.
You're
Well
welcome.
done.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown.
Going back to Commissioner Gillette's questions about how much we're taking out of the reserves to balance the budget, if you can give us an exact number.
Yeah, I'll
That'd be good.
calculate that. I could be a little bit off, but
I mean, an exact number,
Yeah.
so we've got it, because I think we're gonna, we'll probably trim that back a bit
yeah.
to meet that number. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other commissioners. I need a motion.
Question.
Commissioner Myjack.
For Mr. Schmiegel, expenditures, full-time wages. I would like to know what those numbers would be if we propose basically adding no positions to the budget for 2019. Do you have a number off the top of your head?
Not off the top of my head. I think.
Again, I bring this up.
Yeah, I don't
my-
want to do off the fly necessarily. I mean, I can get that to you. Well, quickly, I know we have another meeting on Thursday.
Again, my concern is the budget's not balanced, and I think capital projects and personnel costs play a big role in that,
Well, I would assume that you mean when we're not adding any new positions, we're not talking about the 5 that we're adding because of the judges. I think that's a logical thing to assume. I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
Right.
Okay.
So if you can get that to me Thursday, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Can I get a motion to receive and file? Moved by Leonetti, supported by Brown. Please vote.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Motion passes 13-0.
Press your button, Madam Chair.
Sorry, motion passes 13-0. Okay, next we have budget discussion, policies, and I'm going to turn it over to Chair Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I want to talk to our plan. There's been some discussion early on, and I agree with it, that we should have our motions, maybe amendments, our appropriations ordinance, and any other policies that we're going to be doing with this in place early enough that we can share it with the executive's office, and everybody else has a chance to really, dissect anything and still come up with any plans to change anything. That being said, we've been kind of absolutely not fighting. We've been getting great cooperation, but we've been getting numbers kind of on the fly for the last couple of weeks because of new things coming in, and Steve's been giving us everything as fast as they come in. Point being that I don't think that we would be ready to make some motions today, get an appropriations ordinance done, and then vote on the budget on Thursday as technically planned. The good thing is we have 2 meetings scheduled for next week. The plan, as I see it, and I'm not sure that we're that far apart on a lot of issues, is to talk about possible amendments today and just discuss them and kind of get a feel for where people are on things. On Thursday's meeting, we would be coming back with a fund balance policy, capital plan funding policy, and some other, and any potential amendments that were brought up.
to actually look at on Thursday and vote on. So that by Thursday, we would have a solid plan to say this is what where we're generally where we think we're at. Obviously, and we've discussed this, you know, we can never, what's that? I'll ask for questions in a minute, but we can never, you know, preclude anybody from coming in with a last minute amendment. But, you know, we hope that we're on this and we've had meetings and everybody's met and we've all brought our concerns early enough that everything that you brought up as a concern, we can bring up today, we can discuss it, and we can maybe have Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C on each item. Maybe there's different numbers that we're looking at for capital projects or you know, sheriff department. And so we will have something set up on Thursday based on our conversation today. Again, doesn't mean it can't change still on Thursday. I'd like to get something solid, though, to discuss with everybody so we can, you know, kind of live with it for a week and also have some discussions. I know last year there were some questions on appropriations ordinance that would have been better served had we had a little more time in between to talk with the executive's office on it. So that being said, because of our conversations today, all of this stuff will be available. Some of it will be tomorrow for everybody to email out. So we're going to get it out to everybody as quick as we can. If there's any changes, anything that's printed wrong, or any other concerns that were not addressed, get it back or bring it in on Thursday and we'll discuss it then. So I just wanted to kind of lay out our plan. As of right now, there's not a lot on next Wednesday's meeting. The plan might be, if we can figure it out, to move everything to next Thursday, all the meetings, Wednesdays and Thursdays, so we'd only have one meeting next week. It depends on how much is going on Thursday, but I'd like to tackle it all at one meeting, assuming we can kind of get through the big stuff today and Thursday this week. So any questions in general before Chair Kleinfeld is going to kind of go through just the different, all of you have had a chance, and I think all of you have taken the time to meet with either Crystal or Jen or both on different ideas that you had or different concerns, questions on the budget. We have a list of them in general that have been discussed. There's no particular order to them, but I guess, Veronica or Commissioner, you can do what you'd like. If you want to let everybody bring up their concerns, would you like me to read them? Take the list and we can discuss them.
Okay, so okay, the first two are the first aren't, okay. So you know what, what I'd like to do is open up with Commissioner Gillette, if you'd like to speak to the MSU extension.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. I sent an email out earlier outlining why I think we should amend the budget and use the funds that are currently proposed to go to the MSU extension, rather either go to cutting the budget or, in lieu of that, at least putting it toward roads. And I hope that most of you had a chance to take a look at that email. My interest in doing this was the Macomb County 2017 annual report from the MSU extension. And when looking through the report, I asked myself a couple questions. First, when I look at any part of the budget, I ask myself, is this a priority, number one? Number two, does it duplicate some existing services that we already are, that other departments are providing? And finally, what other participation levels for those particular programs? And in looking through the annual report from the MSU extension, I find that first there's a lot of items in the budget, many of which are in their program, many of which I sort of highlighted that are hard to justify as priorities, whether it's craft classes, gardening classes, the hula hoop contest, the boat cruises, the things like that they outline in the report that they provide that can be sort of, that leap out at you as saying this is not a priority. But then in looking at some of the other things that they do, according to the report, there's also a lot of duplication between what the MSU extension provides and what our school districts are providing, what scouting provides, what our health department provides, what many other departments of government and nonprofits provide. And finally, there are participation concerns. So, just outline some of those participation concerns and priority concerns. They had 175, on their page 5 of their document, they talk about a number of one-day special events. promoting health and fitness that consisted of Mexican cooking classes, gardening classes, and craft classes, of which they had 175 participants. Now, consider this is a county of almost 900,000 people. Other participation levels, when you look at their, hold on. Look at, on page 9, they talk about home ownership, counseling, workshops, and education. Many of these things are duplicated by other entities, home ownership workshops and so forth. They do that in real estate, for example. Mortgage companies provide these type of things. But they had 213 participants at their workshops. Similarly, when it came to home foreclosure prevention, they had 43 participants. And in many cases, it's clear that these participants are not even all from Macomb County. On their page 8, dealing with farm to institution, they talk about 840 participants in that program from throughout southeastern Michigan and the state. So how many of those, came from Macomb? Similarly, on their money management classes, on page 10 of their summary annual report, their money management workshop participants, there were 33. Their Macomb Community Action financial coaching participants, there were 4. The one-time money management participants, there were more, 152. But again, a lot of these, it's unclear, in some cases it is clear, that they are not looking at just Macomb participants, but throughout southeast Michigan. So, for example, their Michigan Water School, Essential Resources for Local Officials, the pilot program they talk about on page 15 drew 28 participants from 7 counties. Okay? You look at their program for homeowner septic system education. They had about 100 participants according to their annual report. There's a lot of septics in Macomb County. There's only 100 participants throughout this 900,000 people county. So I don't want to go on, but I will. I mean,
Just keep in mind that the rest of us we don't all have that report in front of us, so we're just listening to you verbally and we can't really follow along.
Okay, I apologize. I did include a link to the report in the email that I sent, but I probably should have brought copies as well. But I do appreciate that. So if you have a chance, and perhaps I'll bring those reports then when we return for our next meeting, in case you didn't get a chance to look at the link. But when you look at their boat cruise program, their summer discovery cruises, for example, on page 20, they talk about the 377 people that went on boat cruises in Lake St. Clair. Participants came from 18 Michigan counties: Florida, Indiana, New York, Ohio, South Carolina, Virginia. MSU Extension personnel were aboard all the cruises, blah, blah, blah. The 373 participants in their Metro Park Lake St. Clair program, again, were from all over the southeast Michigan area. The long story short is, our primary job is to make decisions about priorities of money. And I don't have constituents calling me saying they demand a free boat cruise. I don't have them calling me saying they need a hula hoop contest. I don't have them calling me saying they need even a farm-to-table nutrition class, which are provided by other entities as well. I have them calling me about roads. I have them calling me about infrastructure. I have them calling me about those priorities. And if we are to prioritize, if that's our job, I think we would benefit our constituents if we took that nearly $1 million that is spent on the MSU extension and instead put it toward roads. I think it's something our constituents would appreciate that we're doing. Yes, there's going to be some people that have participated in these programs that are going to be upset, but those are a small percentage of people compared to our constituents that use the roads. If we could do something as a board to do more for the majority of our constituents, I think that's what we should do. I think this is an opportunity to reprioritize funding that's just simply a little bit less essential, or substantially less essential, in my opinion, and put it toward the roads. I think it's something we should do. When I brought this up to a few commissioners, there were some questions. Some asked me, do we have long-term contracts, for example, with the MSU extension? The answer to that question appears to be, is no. We have a one-year contract through 2018 with the MSU extension. Other questions were, do we get matching funds or grants from the MSU extension that are triggered by the $1 million that we fund? And the answer to that appears to be no as well, based on the research by our staff. So this is pure $1 million that we could do something for the majority of our constituents and improve the roads, even if it's a little bit, more so than the things that are outlined by the MSU extension. As good as those things might be, as heartwarming those things might be, I recognize I've picked on some of the programs that people might think are most frivolous and ignored some work that they do, like a 4-H program and some of these other programs. But again, I think those 4-H programs are relatively limited participation and could be picked up by nonprofits, Farm Bureau, other organizations, scouting, that sort of thing. So I intend to introduce an amendment that would redirect these funds to the roads, and I would welcome any questions and support. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, so we have 4 people lined up to speak, and if this is it about MSU? Because I kind of want to, okay. Commissioner Duge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Although I appreciate Commissioner Drolette's zest and zeal to save $1 million and to spend it on roads, there's a couple of things. First of all, MSU Extension services the population, if you take a look at all their programs and so on and as it goes, from about 12 years old to about 30. The only time we hear about people from 12 years old to 30 are from the county coroner. And although I do appreciate you researching how to dig out MSU Extension and to beat it up and to almost eliminate it, I think we should take a good look at what they do and who they service. Now, $1 million out of an MSU extension or $1 million out of anywhere will be enough to possibly pave, maybe a mile of road. So, as opposed to helping kids and young people in their day-to-day lives, and as they start a family, as they grow, as they buy homes, and hopefully become productive members of our society, to give all that up for a mile of paved road, I'd just assume spend it on the people, because I'm sick and tired of hearing about them dying from our county coroner. And if we can give them something else to do other than sit around and do the heroin bit or anything else, I just assume spend that money that way. So I will oppose taking anything out of MSU Extension based on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. And before I call the next commissioner, I just want to know, I'm looking to get what commissioners are thinking. To cut it all, cut part of it, or cut none of it, so that Crystal has some idea of what she's putting forward, and hopefully without each one of us giving a big speech on every single one of them. That's not directed at you, Commissioner Duge or Commissioner Gillette. Commissioner Romano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My colleague just told me to cut it short. I don't have that warm and fuzzy feeling that Mr. Duge has here. I didn't know that the MSU Extension program allowed you to give out narcotics and kill kids or put them in the coroners. I thought that was money being frivolously spent, and I do agree with you, not 90%, but 100%. That money can be used in a lot of different areas, and there are a lot of programs that are being duplicated. You mentioned $1 million for roads, and Mr. Duge says that's probably a mile. He's probably right, it's about a mile. So how about if we take half of that money and put it in the roads? Let's put the other half in the sheriff's department where it's needed. I mean, there's a lot of other areas that money can be utilized for, and certainly not for something as cooking class or hula hoops or boat cruises, and especially if they're not my constituents. And I say my constituents are all of Macomb County, because you're telling me that they're coming from all over the state. Well, they're not paying taxes to Macomb County. I want those people that pay taxes here that are the ones that we should service. So, Mr. Drolette, I'm with you 100%. If you need a second, you got it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Chair Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make a few points. I've looked at the contract for MSU extension, and although $1 million sounds like $1 million in a vacuum, there are 11 personnel at some point that are connected from our county to work for MSU extension. So I just want to point out all of this, and I appreciate the research that you've done on this, Leon or Commissioner Drollet, and that helps whatever decision that we're making. If you propose something and actually have some good backing for it like this. I also, on the other side of things, I just want to, I'm curious as to, and I know you don't know this, but there's 11 or 40 or 230 participants. I wonder how many of those are the same people, taking this and then taking that and then taking this and then taking that. I don't know. They probably don't do it that way. That's just a concern of mine. But I did want to point out that some of that money is in office space, that apparently, we would pay for, but I don't know if we have connected office space that we would still be paying for some of that office. So there are some more, I guess, questions, that might need to be answered or might not need to be answered in your eyes. But I just wanted to point out the 11 personnel, and I'm not saying that I'm for or against necessarily where you're at with this, because I do understand your point. So that's it. I just want to take a look at and put 11 people towards this also.
Can I have a point of information on that? Is it 11 full-time county employees, or is it?
On the staff, it says the county, well, under the contract, it says the county will provide, and then clerical support staff to the MSU office is agreed upon between the county and MSU district. 5.5 county employed clerical support staff, 1 fiscal administrative assistant, 4 computer maintenance clerks, and 0.5 FTE account clerk 1, 2. So, I mean, those are the
Madam
job
Chair, if I
descriptions
could
of them.
respond very briefly.
I'm just reading from the contract.
No, I understand. I've got the contract here too.
Take notes of what you want to respond to, because I've got other, and if you respond in between each one, I'm going to get a sleeping bag because I'll be spending the night here. I am curious as to if that's over and above the actual dollar amount of the 1 million.
No,
is the cost of those.
This is, I believe this is part of the
Okay.
1 million. From everything I read in the contract, that it's like $500,000 paid to MSU Extension and about
Yeah.
a little under $500,000 in office and clerical and staff. Correct, Steve? Okay.
So it is.
Close,
Okay,
thanks.
Commissioner Carabelli.
Madam Chair, is this just germane to what he
Right
did,
now.
or is this anything?
Just to
Let's
MSU,
MSU right now.
I guess I want to stay on the list for the next one.
Okay.
Just point of information, Commissioner Kraft just showed me the budget. What does that fill, 5.5 positions? Is what is appropriated in the budget Bible.
Okay, Commissioner Leonetti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a tough choice. Commissioner Drollet brings up some great points. There's a lot of duplicative services, a lot of things that, I mean, those kind of programs could be available anywhere. Doesn't, necessarily have to be through MSU, and I'm not even sure if people really know MSU provide those programs. Do you know what I mean? If I had mortgage issues, I might go looking at a bank or even my, sometimes Macomb Community College even have programs for that. So, I agree 100% that our job is to be the fiduciary of the taxpayers' dollars. We just got done with our finance director, and we're spending more than we're bringing in some ways. So, and we're asking for 15 new positions here with the sheriff. So we have to do something. As hard as it is, something has to be done in terms of the budget. We're going to have to break out our pencils, like Commissioner Mijak told me they had to do during the recession, and actually make some tough choices, because right now times are good. And while times are good, we should be banking a little bit of money. I asked Commissioner Mijak just today, I said, hey, when was the county banking money? Because they haven't banked money since 2006. And now we got this great fund money here that we're spending down. But if we're not doing something sooner or later, we're not going to have enough left over when we have the next capital improvement projects that we need to do. So I just think that something has to be done. I would like to see this fiscal administrator from MSU come here and maybe give us a little explanation of how they spend their dollars. And, I'm willing to, if you want an answer, Madam Chair, I'm willing to compromise and reduce their budget. I'm not necessarily sure I want to eliminate altogether, because there's a 4-H program, if I'm not mistaken, that's part of MSU. And a 4-H program, while it sounds a little, and where's Commissioner Brown? I'm sure a lot of people in your district participate in a 4-H program. Is that correct? So, if there's some way we can, I use this word a lot, finagle, get a couple things off the program, like the booze cruise, the hula hoop program, the mortgage thing, the Mexican cooking classes. There's a ton of restaurants I can send them to. They can learn how to really good, Then we can maybe maintain the 4-H program and get back some of those dollars.
But
And that's what I
I
would
don't
support.
think we have that authority, do we? I think that we determine the amount of money that we give them. But I don't think we can go through their brochure and tell them, okay, get rid of this, get rid of this, get rid of this.
But what we'll do
Am I right?
well, let me not to cut
Steve,
you.
am I right about that?
We have a contract that specifies exactly what they provide. We can create that contract and craft it as we see fit. There's nothing that stipulates, in here it talks about the types of things they provide. There's nothing that says you'll provide a 4-H. It couldn't say you provide a 4-H program, and that's what we're paying you for, and that's it.
Right, but we don't negotiate contracts. Administration negotiates contracts. Just keep that in mind. So before I call on Commissioner Lucido, first of all, I don't believe you completely pull the rug out from underneath people going into the year without them having any ability to plan how they're going to deal with that. But I do believe we can say, listen, until we're adding to our fund equity instead of taking away, we're going to start cutting back. So I could agree with 10, 20%, but I don't believe that you throw somebody into absolute crisis in such short period. Oh, okay. So I'm just, if there's a compromise, I'm just throwing that out there. Commissioner Lucido, and I think what's going to happen, because Crystal wanted to kind of gather what we were thinking and create a document. On this particular issue, the way the answers are throwing out there, I think there's actually going to have to be separate votes taken on it before the decision can be made on it. But that's not going to happen today. It'll happen in a couple days. Commissioner Lucido.
I'm giving my opinion to you. I agree with Commissioner Romano. I feel like Parks and Recreation, I feel like there are so many programs that if we want our kids involved, through school sports, through Parks and Rec, through the bank, they just duplicate so many things when I look through the link that Commissioner Drollet provided. I think our priority needs to be the Sheriff's Office and making sure they have the funding they need to get the officers that they've asked for. I don't think Sheriff Wickersham would have asked for them if it wasn't a matter of public safety, and I feel very strongly about that. So if it requires a cut, and this is something that would be understandable by everyone, then I'm with it.
Okay, and I don't see any other speakers. Chair Smith.
Point of information, Commissioner Kraft's correct. It's only 5.5 employed, so somehow we're close to $500,000 with office space and clerical staff of 5.5 people. So, anyway, go ahead.
Okay, you spoke, so now we got speakers. Commissioner Gillette.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate everybody's thoughts on this. I know anytime you identify something to cut, it's controversial. Everything that anybody provides has some constituencies and some people who value it, more than others and so forth. But in response to the suddenness of cutting something, and that it may not be the appropriate time, I'm not sure when is the time then, other than budget time. If we don't do it now, when do we do it? So I think this is the appropriate time. Second, even though it may be jarring to some employees of the MSU Extension, that's something that I don't want to be insensitive about. But at the same time, our job is not to protect programs. Our job is to allocate resources in the best interest of our constituents. And if it sometimes means people have to make adjustments, that happens in the private sector all the time. People lose their jobs, they have to find a new job. People, businesses close. They have to go find a new business. There's lots of things that happen in the private sector that is uncomfortable, and sometimes it has to happen in government too. So sometimes, yes, some people have to be reprioritized. With regard to the employees, that requires a little bit more looking at that, Chairman Smith. But I believe that the 5.5 allocated employees are county employed individuals that we provide do services for the MSU extension, such as clerical, administrative, office space, that sort of thing, those individuals would not be eliminated. Rather, they'd be freed up from providing those services for the MSU extension, and the time that they are currently spending doing that, they would be freed up to do other administrative tasks, other clerical tasks, other things for other departments. I believe that's the case, and perhaps somebody in the administration would be able to answer that question more carefully. I believe the MSU extension only has 2 full-time employees that work, though, that are dedicated to the MSU extension, but they are hired and retained by the MSU extension. We just cover that cost. As a matter of fact, when the MSU extension came and provided their report, that was at a time that we...
Not a speech in between each one, please. Please.
Okay, I'll try, Madam Chair. We did switch from them being county employees to being MSU extension employees just this past year. So those 2 people are MSU extension employees. So I will try, I just wanted to respond to those thoughts and concerns. And by the way, I would like to eliminate entirely and fund as much of it toward roads as possible, but I'm willing to compromise, obviously. If there's people who believe that 4-H, some people have prioritized. My district doesn't think awarding a GOAT awards is the most important priority in the county, and other people might think that is very important. So we can talk about that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sorry about that. Commissioner Romano.
Listen, I want to apologize. Mr. Duge, that's not a personal attack on you. I'm Italian, I get loud. So police commissioners appreciate that. When I talk loud too, and I also have a speaker here. So having said that, if you don't, please don't take that personally. It's no attack on you or anybody else when I speak loud. I'm just a very passionate person. Thank you.
Commissioner Duge.
Fair enough, Commissioner Romano. But I wanted to address Commissioner Leonetti's point. I've got a huge 4-H club in my district. So after everything's said and done, it's not just in his district, it's in my district. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And I'm sorry, Commissioner Gillette, I'm not trying to pick on you, but I feel like I am picking on you, so I apologize for that. Okay, so it's clear, I think, from this one that there isn't direct, especially since several commissioners didn't even speak, they don't have a particular direction. So that one's, I think, going to have to be sorted out when the motions fly, and I won't be chairing when that happens. So good luck with that. Okay, so the next one I'm going to do is the sheriff's deputy request for 13 for overtime reduction, and I'm going to open this up with Chair Smith.
Thanks. I had this conversation with most of you that last year the sheriff came in and asked for 4 positions. I believe 2 were corrections and 2 were patrol. And we kind of stood ready then to approve those positions, but we didn't based on the class and comp study. And I remember telling him, and that was based on talking really with everybody, that when that's done, you come back in and we would approve those positions. And for some reason, all of those positions, except for those 4, came to us halfway through the year, and we approved all the other positions that we were waiting for, except for those 4. That being said, I just want to start this conversation off with my belief is that we're looking at 12 positions, because I'm not even considering not giving him the 4, right, that we promised him last year. So I'm just going to say with me, when my discussion and my train of thought on how many positions that we do, whether it's the full 16, 17 with the court officer or not, is going to start based on the request of that I've already had it in my mind that I've given them 4 last year. And we've had this discussion, and I know it's kind of interesting to some people, maybe the way I think, but I think we kind of did I say we owe them for sure those positions because we were going to give them to them last year anyway. So that's my personal idea on where I'm going to be coming from when we start picking whether we're going to go all or some or even none. I would still be at 4, right? So that's, I guess, my first take on this. Second, I will say this, that we've talked to Steve a little bit about overtime reduction, and he has told us that this is going to reduce overtime almost 1-to-1, although, and I'm not, we see that we've heard it before, and it doesn't always, either that or we're never able to really track it to see if it happens. I guess I'll say that. We've asked, I think, for some more clarification in the last week from the Sheriff Department on, and listen, I don't even know what to ask for, which is why we have Crystal and Jen. And they've asked for some more clarification and a little bit more of a business case for this. And we didn't get really anything different back, I guess, at the end of the day, what the requests that we were looking for. So I will tell you this, I am obviously for, if this cuts overtime and the case is made, then I would be for giving all the positions. At this point, I'm not sure that I'm there right now to give all those positions, but I'm certainly there always in the option to extend. So I will say that if I said I want to give 8 positions plus the 4, if Sheriff Wickersham came back and sold me on the last 4 because of the business case that was able to be presented, I don't have a problem with the mid-year adjustment either, because we all know that at the end of the day, we're going to be behind the safety first of our community and of our law enforcement officers. So I just want to tell you, though, that we did not get, I mean, we had plenty of people in here last time with guns making their case that this was an overtime reduction issue. I'm not sure, how about if we have a few more people speak, and then maybe Crystal or Jen can kind of explain some of the questions we asked and maybe some of the responses that we're waiting for.
We do have a few more. I think we need quick clarification. You spoke to 16 positions and 17, and then -4. And then this says 13, and then it says 4 should have been, so that takes it to 9. And
Well,
I don't have that
I'm
sheet,
sorry.
so I just want to make sure,
So-
if Crystal, if you could, do you have that sheet that lays out exactly what's being requested so that there's no confusion in the discussion?
Go ahead, start your mic up.
I have it in my book, but I just don't have it in front of me, and I just want everybody to understand what we're debating. Thank you.
Okay, so the request was for 17. 2 are corrections officers, 3 are corrections officers. 1 was for the new judge. So that brought us to 13 because when we were looking at deputies, I didn't include that staff in the 13. So he included their entire request, but when I pulled out the number I sent to you, it was just for the additional staff excluding corrections officers and the deputy that would be assigned to the judge.
The request is 17.
Right, their
The
total request was 17,
17,
yeah.
with 3 of them being corrections and 14 being deputies, 1 of them going to the new judge.
Thank you. Commissioner Gillette.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So does that mean 13?
The request is for, I'm sorry, point of information, sorry. The request is for 17. 3 of them are corrections officers. Right. Well, they don't count, but they count, right? I mean, so they count. I mean, they're asking for it. 1 for the judge, and that's, now 13, 13 more correction officers. Deputies. I'm sorry, I'm getting confused.
So Warren, he's got 4 coming, we owe him 4. That's for sure.
I-
How many more does he want?
13.
So that's 18, or 17, I'm sorry.
Yes.
So that's what we're talking about,
Yeah.
17.
17 total.
Total.
Correct.
Got it, thank you. Okay, I got it.
17 total, 3 correction, the rest are deputies. 1 of those deputies is for the judge.
Okay, let me get back to Commissioner Gillette.
Thank you. So, Madam Chair, through you to the chair, you mentioned you're having a little bit of a hard time getting all the numbers for the business case. Is there a hard number of how much actual overtime we would be reducing? Is there a realistic number for how much we'll be saving in overtime by hiring these deputies? Is there some comfortable number that we've gotten there yet?
Well, how about this? I think we'll let Jen talk to this, and then maybe Steve, can talk, because they've discussed different things a lot of times, and sometimes, they end up at the same point. It just gets there different. So let's, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, no, just kind of to talk about when a request would come, before the board for this, you'd usually see some supporting information in terms of what are the current actual overtime costs that are being incurred for this service. We did request that information from finance and from the sheriff's office, and it apparently is not tracked that way. So we were given some some large numbers, just kind of like summed up into two different areas. One was for the jail and then one was for everything else. So it's really difficult to see, how much we're spending on court transport, which is, the request that's being made that the overtime will be reduced by adding these officers. I'm sorry. So it's just difficult to make that business case and to understand kind of a data-driven process for how this is going to actually result in a reduction of, it's proposed of a $476,000 savings in overtime because of this. Steve,
Would you concur with that, Steve?
Concur with what?
Concur with that it's hard to get the exact number of how much this will save in overtime or a good estimation of it based on the way the data is?
No, I wouldn't concur, actually.
Okay.
We don't track, what's true is we don't track overtime. We track it in road patrol. That includes prisoner transport, deputies on the road, a number of different activities. We don't track it by function within the road patrol. That's true. What I also provided the board was something like this that shows how we got to the 13. I think it's fairly self-explanatory that if you look at court transport, if we're running 9 cars a day, we budget for 2 or budget for 7. We may not be able to track it necessarily in the general ledger by transport, but it's fairly obvious that just based on simple math, if we're running 9 court cars a day, we need another 7 guys. I think as well, I can calculate the number, I've calculated it actually, based on 13 or 16 new personnel. By position, there's only 2, there's corrections deputies and deputies, and how much that would reduce overtime versus how much it would reduce or increase base pay. That's been provided as well. There's about a $4,500 savings per position by adding a deputy, and it's about it's even closer break even by action or a corrections deputy. So whether those, tracking it is a little more difficult the way we have our payroll system coordinated or set up. However, we're running $4.5 million of overtime at the jail or at the sheriff's department. This addresses a third of it, or maybe a little less than a third, 20%.
Okay.
So I understand what Jen's saying in terms of being able to track it by function. But I think the sheriff has provided, and this sheet here would provide the math between, or how we got to the number. Actually, if you look at this, the data would suggest if all of this is happening, we know the court officers, there are 16 judges, there's going to be 16 court officers. That's a known fact. We need 3 more people to cover sick and annual leave time and time off and all those sorts of things. The hospital, guards, maybe a little bit, harder to determine. We've budgeted for 2. The sheriff will tell you 2 to 8. Sometimes it's a day, 1 prisoner in the hospital. The data suggests, based on what we're being told, that we need almost 20, 19 and a half. We put in 13. I would suggest to you that we're short. And I would also suggest to you that the change in our benefit structure, basically the elimination of the defined benefit plan, is the vehicle that's making this affordable. Because what Chair Smith said in the past is true. If we added somebody, it wasn't necessarily, it didn't pan out because the new person came in with the defined benefit plan and retiree health care and increased FAC and all those sorts of things.
Okay. Well,
and remember that
now, if I'm going to lecture him on going on and on, I got to lecture you
one
too.
comment. So remember, the sheriff was telling you that 43%, the main driver, another driver of this is that almost 43 or 44% of the overtime is forced overtime. So it's causing stress on the workforce there as well.
Right.
So,
well, thank you for letting him go on, Madam Chair, because this is very helpful information to me in trying to make these decisions. And I think you touched on something in there that maybe we don't think about. One of the concerns we've had within hiring of people for the Sheriff's Department is, what are our benefit packages like? What are our pay like? But on top of that, there's also the what is the quality of life associated with the job? And so if we're able to reduce forced overtime, we are able to actually potentially save money and yet still at the same time make the job more appealing to potential applicants, because we're not going to be forcing them to
Yeah, I
accept
think there's a
overtime as
difference
often.
in today's workforce than the workforce of the past in terms of the importance of quality of life.
Right. So I do appreciate the discussion on these numbers, and Steve, your input there, and Jen's as well. I certainly, though, am far more inclined to increase spending here, where I think my constituents say this law enforcement is a priority, and protecting our community is a very top priority. And I think that's something we should prioritize. So if there is even if there's a little bit of gray area, when as best information as possible, I think I want to give law enforcement the benefit of the doubt. I want to make sure I can tell my constituents that we did all we could to provide them a safe community. So that's just my thoughts. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Steve, would the video arraignments make any, really being more proactive in using those, would that make any difference at all?
Point of information, I'll say that's, we're working on this with the sheriff and the chief judge, and Steve, I'm not sure is even in on that part of it yet to be able to answer this question, but the video arraignment really only happens on Mondays, and it's usually right now in the afternoon, although we're discussing that. So it should make a difference, but it's not going to make a huge difference.
No,
but
and
it's
I'm
problem,
not
yeah.
even thinking. I was thinking if we're really going to get serious about that, maybe we look at, and I don't know what everybody else is thinking, but maybe we look at 15 of the 17 until that's enacted and see how it goes. But I was just curious.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Commissioner Lucida.
I'll be brief, I promise. I know Chair Smith described how he thought of it, and I think of it similar, as if it's 12 because we promised the 4 prior. But I also take the 3 corrections officers out of that because obviously our jail needs those officers. So that, I don't feel like that's even negotiable. And the 1 judge, we have to have that for the judge. So I feel like I'm really looking at 9 instead of 13, if that makes sense.
No, the 9 were. Right.
I see what you're saying. Right.
You're right.
Right? So
Yep.
that's the way that I look at it. And I know Sheriff Wickersham talked to us about how he had the study done at for him, and he was looking at like 30 officers that really, what was it? Corrections that really should have been added. And he was asking for whatever it was, 16, 17. So I think we need to consider that. He's likely to come back throughout the year and ask for way more if we aren't, giving what he really feels he needs at this time. Also, my biggest concern is, besides public safety, the morale. I feel like if you're forcing people into overtime, they're just not happy and they're not doing their best work. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Commissioner Leonetti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do echo a little bit of what Commissioner Lucido says. When I think about the numbers, I'm thinking around 9 as well. But I do have a question. I know some deputies are here. I asked Sheriff Wickersham how many vacancies are currently in the department, and I remember him distinctly telling me 8. But I wasn't clear on exactly what positions were vacant. So that has to come into mind, because if you're 8 short, that might be why you're having some overtime. But go ahead.
Thanks, Commissioner. John Roberts, Sheriff's Office. So I'll speak to that one first. So currently there are 9 deputy vacancies. Okay, but 5 are currently being filled in lieu of with corrections deputies in the effort to continue to stave off the overtime in the jail side, as well as that in December, when he makes the next round of promotions to deputies, that the corrections officers will already be there and we won't have that lag time of months to fill the corrections deputy spots. So far this year, we've promoted 23 deputies throughout the year, and in December, when the academy graduates, then probably we'll wind up filling all of those vacancies at that point, and that we would have most of the corrections deputies in place. We'd have to do we have some that are waiting now to fill those positions when they open, when he creates the promotions.
So if those 9 vacancies are filled,
Yes.
and we give you 9 new positions, then theoretically we're at 18.
Well, these positions aren't new ones. The
Right, I know
ones
they're
that
not
are
new,
vacant,
right. But I mean, they're not. Nobody's in that position. Nobody's doing that job right now. It's vacant.
Well,
It's kind of like if I had a ship and I had a crew, and I needed to have 20 people on the crew, but I only had 9 people on the crew. I'm operating on 9 people, But once I get that extra 11, I'm at full crew, and then I say, I need 9 more. I'm at 29. I guess that's just my thinking,
Well, I would say that, all of those positions being fully staffed was all part of the calculations when finance was looking at what the staffing level is, working with the sheriff, working with human resources to all come together. That it wasn't the sheriff or his people that came up with the number, that 13, although we did our calculations as well. Finance did that outside of us. So I'll say it's an objective look at that they, as far as on the business side of things, that they were looking at the amount of time that is used by these positions. So we're talking specifics here. We were talking about like 38 positions. We're talking about all the circuit court. We're talking about including the Station 3 lockup. That is where the prisoners are housed while they're there waiting to go back and forth between the courts. Okay, that we're talking about the court transport, which currently there's only 7 vans budgeted, so 14 deputies. We're including those, including the probate court, the Romeo court, so those court officers that we have. That doesn't even include the part that was talked about all of the medical runs, which the trend is now different than it was years ago. The population is definitely much more in need of health care. So, but I'll come back to that in a second. For the positions, those positions are all in place, that there really is not a shift relief factor built in, which means that the only thing that is covered for them is their leave days. So there are no shift relief if they use any benefit time, a vacation day, a sick day, they get sent to training, any of that sort of thing that they're off. There is no built-in staff to replace them, okay? That in all of the contract areas, in all of the regular road positions that need to be filled, there is a shift relief factor. So if somebody takes a day off, you have somebody to fill it. These positions, there is not. Okay, so, which does not even include, then we start getting into that we do not have anybody to staff for the medical runs, which, I mean, I can throw out some things wrong. We had nearly 16,000 hours of overtime just for hospital guards, which there is no staffing for that, okay, for the number of times just this year so far. That we had for medical transports, another 3,700, so close to 20,000 hours between those two things of overtime. So if you want to figure that out, we're probably around $900,000 in overtime that we're doing just for those transports that there's no staff for. Not in, which doesn't even take into account the part that we're here about. So we've already way compromised. Okay, we are not shooting for the stars here. Finance, when they did their objective look at it, as they showed you on there, was seeing 20 just for those court areas and a couple transports, and yet reduced the request to just 13. Okay, so the sheriff has already taken all of that into account of, we still have to find a way to work with less than optimum number. But there certainly is a business need. So, I mean, I could go through more of these numbers. I know I'm going to get yelled at in a minute. But, okay, if anybody wanted to build the work model.
I think it's important that what you're telling us is you're not coming in here and shooting high. Like, you're not trying to say, look, we only really need 9, so we'll just give me 13 and you guys will compromise on 9. I get what you're saying. So I appreciate it, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Douget.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello, Captain. And you don't shoot high, I don't think. That being said.
Right on the mark.
Question. The request is for 13 positions.
13 deputies, yes.
13 deputies. All right. How long do you think it's going to take to fill the 13 positions? That's one.
Okay. Do you want me to answer?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So we have already been talking with the police academy. We've been, the undersheriff's been working along with the unions and with human resources to try to step anything up that we can. Looking at even doing things to hire people who are pre-certs, or we've been reaching out to actually, instead of having other departments steal from us, to try to lure some people over. But we know that we can get, we probably would send all of them, I'll say probably. The plan is that we would send all of them to the academy in January.
Okay.
Okay, that we would still have some that he, from this past academy, that he could promote. Let's see, there's currently in there 12 in there right now, so he would make the 9. He'd still have 3 to apply towards that 13.
All right.
Okay, so, and we would send those out, so those could start in January, go through their FTO, field training officer, on the job training, and they would be up and running. We have worked things out with the union that we're allowed to utilize those people with a partner in the court transports.
How, okay, when would they be up and running 100% by themselves? 3 months, 2 months?
After 3 months.
After 3 months, all right.
Right, and so the academy part would go through to May, and then when they graduated, they put them through the FTO part. So we're talking getting into the second quarter to the
So half of this is going to happen in June or July?
Yes.
At the earliest?
Well,
okay. Next part of that question, how many people are you going to lose to retirement or whatever other process that they go through?
Well, I don't.
I mean, they get replaced, so that.
Yeah, but there's going to be people that get retire at the higher end of the scale, getting replaced by lower people, and he's already said that half of these people are going to come in by June or July. So before June or July, how many are you going to lose?
Yep. My belief is that we're not looking at a large number for next year. You know, we don't really hear until HR tells us somebody came and retired, and then they let us know, oh, by the way, they retired.
All right.
So I can't say for sure. I know that on the command side, you know, in the rank structure, there's a couple that are scheduled to go. One at the beginning of the year, one at the end of the year. So in that regard, there's not.
Neither one of them are you, are they?
Next question.
Okay, thank you. I'd hate to lose you because I think you do a terrific job there.
Thank you.
But the point, after everything's said and done, you're going to have losses on the command side in the jail, and a lot of these people aren't going to get fully operational until June or July. So saying, okay, we'll take 13 people, this is not going to happen next month. So the numbers are going to be skewed no matter what.
And I would say that we would continue on the operational side, that if they're approved at the beginning of the year, that we would be hiring the corrections deputies in lieu of. So one, we would be cutting down the jail time, overtime reduction, and we'd have them ready so that as soon as the people were promoted, we'd fill the spots. There's no lag time creating more overtime.
Okay.
Thank you
very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Captain.
Thank you, Commissioner Carabelli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess the first one's going to go to Steve, if I can. See, my question is, and the way I understood it, is currently, as of today, we didn't break out overtime in different areas. Is that pretty much true?
Within,
It's kind of a
correct.
Okay. When was the last time we did a study for our contract sheriffs?
You mean when we updated the patrol contracts?
The contracts with the municipalities, the contract deputies. When was the last time the study was done on true cost?
On true cost? We just updated that with the new contracts. So we haven't gone back to see. we know that true costs are, fluctuating. We need to look back for the last contract period.
So I think it's been a while since we actually did a study, right?
Been a few years.
Okay. I got grave concerns right now, listening to the conversation with everybody. A lot of great points everybody brought up. And what's lacking out of this is, number one, are we putting something in place January 1st that we're going to track the deputies' time of where they're allocated and their overtime? So in the future, if there's a concern, we can actually, yes, here's the time that's allocated. This was for the hospital. This was for this, instead of guessing on what this stuff is.
Yeah, I've had a brief conversation.
We have a
I'll
lot
say.
of technology we're paying for, right?
Yeah, I've had a brief conversation with the sheriff to have further conversations
Okay.
with him to.
Because this is where
I don't know what that's going to
Are we
entail.
recouping what we're charging communities? Obviously, it's a few years ago with increases in wages and everything else. I now have reservations because we don't even really know with overtime where we're at because it's not allocated somewhere. It's almost where we're not here to micromanage anybody, and I'm not intending to be, but unless I can see a picture to see an org chart of these officers are for this, these guys are for that, and this is the overtime, let me finish. This is the overtime generated for court transports. And the problem is court transports, the district courts are demanding it all at the same time, and that's why so many officers are pulled in for overtime, because we got district courts requesting transport or circuit court that the sheriff can't control. He has to provide the service. Is that the problem? Is it because the courts, as in the different ones we have for transport, are doing whatever they want because they're not accountable to the sheriff or to the Board of Commissioners? I don't know, because I don't know those hours dedicated to those individuals. So if we don't know how this is broken out, it's kind of hard to even say yes or no, other than, I don't think the sheriff is frivolously coming in and asking for anything. I think he's doing his job and he's coming in and asking for what he needs. But to really understand, saying this is what needs to be done, because black and white shows this is what you have. If you have 30 officers, I need to have 2 for vacations and sick time, or whatever the multiplier is on how you figure that. I don't know right now, I don't know if any commissioner here sitting here knows how many deputies that there are on the road total in the sheriff's department. Not correction officers. Didn't think so. How many correction officers? I don't think we know that either. The point is we're asking for stuff to cover, and we don't have that org chart saying, here's where they're laying. This is the area the overtime is in. Discussion's over. Pretty simple, but it takes time to figure out what those true overtime hours and where they're applied to, and are we charging those communities the right amount of, I don't want to overcharge or undercharge. I want it to be what it is supposed to be. Is it by law, and I'm asking Steve because I don't know the answers to this, is it by law we have to provide a deputy for the courts? Does the law say, okay, somebody said yes. I want to see the law then, show it to me, because I want to see where it says we have to provide a deputy to the court. Do we? How many do you say there in the court? 13?
One for each judge, so I think.
16?
16 plus
16 deputies, a lot of
probation,
deputies.
juvenile.
Does the law say we have to? I don't know the answers to this, but these are the things that I'd like to see. I hear any more things about these district courts that we're funding right now. I got Ajadu up to here. At the end of the day, I got to have that information to help formulate a decision. Again, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. That's why I need that information. Thank you.
Let me back up just a little bit, Commissioner. The payroll system doesn't necessarily track by function. The sheriff's department may have data that they can compile on more specific numbers on court transport or hospital duty, or, based on actual overtime sheets.
Well, we have started to try to find that we can put more entry into the one solution finance system. It's whether we're going to be able to get all the information back out. That's what we're going to find out as we go forward, but we are doing more tracking. But to part of your question regarding the contracts, which that's actually, I think, going to come to next month's meetings, the contracts. But these ones, we don't utilize these deputies that we're discussing to work in any of the contract areas. Okay, the contract areas, they have the number of deputies that they pay for, and then we operationally have set up what the scheduling is for the day, so afternoons, mids, days shift, and a minimum complement that we have there during those times.
Point of information, perfect example. How many contract deputies do you have to the different communities?
I can probably break them down,
Just
or
roughly give me a number. 20?
No, well, there's 30 in Macomb Township.
Okay, my point to you, do those extra deputies you have to cover their off time, their sick time and vacation time, is that formulated into what we're charging them?
Yes.
Okay, well, again, I don't know. I'd like to see that.
Yeah, that's right. I was just saying, we set it up so that usually it's set so if at least one, sometimes two of them are calling in, they're not replaced at all. Okay, so we have set a minimum of how many will be out on patrol that we can still actively patrol that area. And then there is built into the cost that finance has assessed and that goes to all of the contracts to cover those costs. But I just wanted to clear up that we're not using these 13 for those contract areas.
Chair Smith.
Thanks. I just want to point out, based on what you're saying, is Crystal and Jen have been working on a lot of things this year that we've never really, looked at before. And we knew that we weren't going to, reinvent the wheel in this year. So what I'm going to say is that at this point, I mean, we're getting our finance director saying it's going to cover, 1-to-1, and the sheriff coming in, talking about how he's doing it. I think what I want to point out is that next year, our plan is to have a little better detailed request form when it comes down to request for positions and different things like that. And we kind of knew this coming in. We already had the budget in front of us, and this is kind of a big challenge to get that type of form going and that type of a request, parameters on how we would request. And the sheriff department is probably the most difficult of all to figure out where all your overtime, comes from. So that would probably be the most difficult. But we are, I'll just say, looking forward to, and Steve's been working, great with them about, reporting in the future, different things like that we're talking about. So I will say that I hope that next year is a little easier for everybody. The sheriff comes in with new positions. Maybe it's, on a 3-page form that all the questions are answered, and it comes to us, and we go, okay, that's great. And that's kind of what we're looking for in the future. For what we're trying to get this process down to is a much more simpler form of question and answer, where all of the backup is already provided with the budget. So we're just talking big picture things instead of dollars and cents with this. So I will say that next year I hope is going to be a little bit easier based on a lot of the work and the questions that we're asking this year.
Thank you. Commissioner Sager.
Madam Chairman, quite a few times I've said this with this board, and it always comes up to the sheriff's department. Why don't more of the guys on this board go over and see and talk to and walk around and see what's going on over there? Too many try to be the commander-in-chief over here. Sure, I know you set the budget and you put the money, but go over and see what they're doing. Go over by the court in the morning when these court details are getting ready. There's 8 vans and they're just loaded. But to keep harping on getting less guys over there, I'm against that. I always will. I work there, and I wish I was on this committee that was talking about this particular thing, but I'm not. So be it, okay? But I work there. I know what's going on in some of these people. But you got to remember that a lot of deputies, when they're called in to work overtime in the jail, they get deputies paid time and a half. Where correctional officers, you already used them all up. And so there's a big difference in money right there, from a deputy to a correctional officer. And I got a couple other things written down here. And the other thing I heard question here about getting these guys to the courts, you never, and there's one sweet little gal here who will find it out, you don't never tell a judge when to bring prisoners. They get their schedule, and they know when they want them. So you can't say, I'm bringing our people over tomorrow. No, they're coming the next day. I mean, that's what's been going on this board, and the judges control it. And they're great people over there, but they got their schedule. And that all goes back to what I was saying. More of our people got to go over to that jail and see what the hell they're doing there. Instead of take this deputy away, this one away, you got to be there. And if you're not, shame on you. There's a few more things, but I'm done for tonight.
Thank you, Commissioner Sauger. I just want to ask you, when you are referring to a committee that you didn't sit on, what are you
Somebody talked about this on this board, about reducing the manpower. Somebody had to.
Point of information, Commissioner, every commissioner, I believe almost every commissioner came in and sat down and talked with our board staff and brought up their ideas or potential concerns with the budget. So somebody brought this up. No committee or anything like that came to it. So
Yeah,
just to
and-
let you know how
well,
this works.
I can further clarify, some of these were put on here just based on
Based
the
on
discussion
conversation
that
in
took
the room.
place over the several months.
The bottom line is, please, when you got a day off or half a day, go over to the jail, see the captain or one of them, the undersheriff, and hey, take me around, show me what you're talking about.
But I appreciate that I asked that question, because there have been times that there have been committees that we didn't know about. So I appreciate you bringing that up so that, we could clarify that in this situation.
Point of information, not in the last 2 years.
Commissioner Romano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was hoping Commissioner Sauger, in fact, I'm pretty sure you're referring to that sweet young lady as the future Judge Toko, and that's who you were pointing at. So I just want to make sure I got that straight. Just a point of information for myself. I see two of our law enforcement officers here in the commissioners. I'm looking at one with a badge and one with a shield. So tell me what's the difference. I really don't know.
That's why you should go over there.
Yeah, they might keep me there. That's why I don't want to go.
And point of information, I'm willing to take any of you to jail if you'd like to go. Okay, so they're both for the sheriff's badge. This is part of the bicentennial celebration, that this is a commemorative badge from the 200 years that we've been in. That's that version. This is our regular version, so.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Commissioner Brown because he hasn't spoken yet. And then I'll call on Commissioner Duche. Go ahead, Commissioner Brown.
Thank you. I don't think those deputies were asked for because he didn't need them or he's trying to pull one over on us. Now, I don't like what I heard either about maybe documentation of the overtime and how those shortages are affecting the overtime budget. But that could probably be tightened up and probably should be. But, man, they need them. I mean, Steve presented us the information right there to show that those deputies are warranted and needed. We don't want people. We've had, how many lawsuits we have at the jail? Maybe some of that has to do with the guys that are working double shifts, maybe because they're working, 16-hour days, mandatory at that. My brother's a deputy sheriff in Oakland County. He's been in there a long time, and he's still got to work double shifts, 16 hours a day, and I'm worried for his safety. How can you do your job well 16 hours a day doing at the stress level? And this isn't a desk job. These are high stressful positions. And we're going to force people to do double duty? And you think the sheriff's just trying to pull an order, say, I just want more deputies, they'll appease my union over there? Come on. They need them. And I'm not going to short the sheriff's department on things that they need. They're MSU extension, okay, that's definitely not on the same level of priority. It's probably the furthest opposite end of the priority spectrum, right? But law enforcement, the safety of our men and women over there at the jail is key, and ultimately to us who they protect. So this is much ado. I don't understand why we're debating this so long, because in my mind it's pretty clear we've got to give them what they need, and law enforcement, you can't err on the side of law enforcement. Thank you. Not enough anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, and I have one more speaker.
Thank God.
Oh, come on. Commissioner Duche.
Thank you. Matter of fact, I agree with Commissioner Brown. I think we should approve the 13 people as soon as we possibly can, because this isn't going to come in until later anyway. And just for everybody else's information, overtime is, one shift of overtime is considered 8 hours. So this is not easy, and if you go to the jail, I'd suggest everybody go there just to take a look, because spending any more than 8 hours there, I think you get jaded, and I think safety is a priority. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chair Smith.
Thanks. Well, we've had an awful lot of discussion, but Commissioner Brown, I didn't really hear too much debate. And, you know, so everybody's been, at this point, on basically the same side of this. So unless I hear something different coming from anybody, I mean, we've been debating generally on the same side of all of this, right? And I will say that in the future, not just, and I don't mean just for the sheriff, but for all departments, there, you know, we may, as a board, want to have a little more criteria to look at to make this discussion easier. But at the same time, I don't hear any real debate on it. I hear a lot of one-sided conversation. So that being said, if anyone has any other points to make,
Thank you.
don't hear anything
I
different.
actually agree with that. I was just telling him that one doesn't need to be a separate, because I'm not hearing debate on the other side. And I didn't take up anybody's time because
Let me ask you, when you say debate, I mean, I think there's a,
Are we really going to have a debate about whether or not we're debating?
Well, I'm a little bit confused.
Are we
Hold
gonna
on,
do that?
I'm not, hold on, give me a moment, just give me a moment to understand. The consensus that I get is we're all for giving him positions, but how many positions might be the debate? That's what I'm.
Okay, then I think what we need to do when we get down to the voting is vote individually on these before they're incorporated in a thing. That's the only way we're going to get to where we're going on it then. But that's not my call. That's not my meeting. So, okay. Well, because you still had the floor and I cut in on you, so.
All right, well, thank you, Madam Chair.
Can I respond to that, please, real quick? Robert and I will say that, generally speaking, what we're looking for here are possible amendments, right? I mean, right now, the request is for 17 total positions at the end of the day, and what we're looking for is something, if there was someone that said, well, I want to give them 15, not 17, then that would be on Thursdays as also would 17, or someone said 10, or, you know, so that's what we're generally looking for. Leon's, you know, MSU extension. I'm not sure that and Crystal took better notes, but it would be all or nothing, and I don't know if I heard anyone say 50%, but they might have said. So what we're looking for in this debate isn't a debate necessarily, unless you have, you know, an opposing view, so to speak, that would say X amount, right? So that's what we're kind of looking for here, so we have something to go by with what we would put in writing for Thursday, which can still be changed, I would say, but I'm just trying to make it easier.
Okay, Commissioner Leonetti.
I mean, if you want to keep things moving forward so that we decide this tomorrow or when we come back, if you're looking for that, if you're looking for somebody to make an amendment.
He said he did not want any decisions made at this meeting, so I opened it up as a discussion.
Okay.
Otherwise, I'd be flying amendments.
Well, that's why I was confused when you said there wasn't a debate. It was more discussions and opinions, and I've listened to whatever the points Commissioner Brown said were very valid. The points that Commissioner Carabelli said were very valid, and I think tomorrow I'm going to be prepared to, you know, vote on somebody's amendment or go as is, you know, one or the other. So I just was confused with the comment that there was no debate.
I'm going trick-or-treating tomorrow, but you can come here.
Well, it's Thursday. You got it.
Anyway, can we move on to the next one, or do we need to have a discussion further on this?
Can we just get our schedule, what's our schedule going forward? I have
sorry.
Justice and Public Safety on next Wednesday.
Okay, I don't think you're here when I discuss this, if you don't mind. Tomorrow, Thursday, we have a meeting, full board.
No, I was here. You said we don't know if we're having it or not.
No, we're having full board. Next
Okay.
week, we have a meeting Wednesday and Thursday. Right now, there's nothing on Wednesday's agenda. I would prefer to put everything on Thursdays and just have one meeting next week and include the final vote of the budget on that.
So what are you doing with
if
Justice and
there's-
Public Safety?
What's that? On Wednesday? Thursday. So Thursday's already a meeting, so is Wednesday. Wednesday has nothing on the agenda at this point, so I don't really see a point in holding, or very few things. So I would say that if we don't have much more, we put everything on Thursday so we can wipe through the business and then vote on the budget. If we want to have Wednesday and Thursday meeting, that's fine, and that's up to the board, so we'll talk about that at the end.
Yeah, I mean, if you guys want to talk about that under new business, I really want to get through these.
I'm just trying to figure out the calendar going forward. That's fine.
Okay.
Well, keep Wednesday and Thursday.
All
but you
right,
can
yeah,
X off
moving
Wednesday.
forward, the next one I have, and a couple of these are things that they heard people talk about Nope, there might be nobody interested, so we'll find out. So the next one is remove Assistant Prosecutor 4 for new judge. I don't know who brought that up, so if there's any commissioner that wants to speak to it? Okay, then next item.
No, I had a question on that. When Steve did the budget presentation, I asked if the new judge was going to be doing criminal or family, or how did we know we would need a new prosecutor? And the response that I received, or that I heard, was, that's what we've always done. And we never heard anything beyond that, that's what we've always done. So I did ask that, I was the one that asked that question.
And what was the answer is it gonna be
The answer I got was, that's what we've always done.
I don't remember exactly, but it seems like the prosecutor might have addressed that during his budget presentation, but I don't remember. It seems like he did, but I don't remember for sure. So we could talk to
Point
him
of
and have
information
him come
too.
address it.
You know, point of information, if I remember when the chief judge was here, I asked him, is it going to be family law? He actually said it was going to be a civil judge position. So you wouldn't really need a prosecutor for a civil judge position. You would definitely need one for family law because you got the juvenile courts, and you would also need one for obviously a criminal docket. So I was confused, and I'm glad you asked the question, because the chief judge said, no, it's going to be a civil judgeship.
Well, maybe there's some questions that need to be asked between now and Thursday and some answers, because I don't recall it being that. I thought it was a combination, but nonetheless, maybe we can get these answers by Thursday. All right?
Okay, capital plan fund reduction. There was just a lot of vague talk, I think, you know, IT and things like that. Commissioner Carabelli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Steve, you got a minute? Here's my question. There's a lot of stuff that was brought up, and you were going to look into some stuff. And moving forward, I know that there's whatever happened to the 911 capital project fund. We had a separate fund that was set up for 911 that took for the 911 system. It was funded by a combination of federal, state, government funding, and general fund. And the following programs that it was funding was the E911 radio system, E911 cellular fee, E911 radio maintenance. Whatever happened to that fund, because I didn't see it in the budget.
I have to look, because that fund is not, the only 911 fund I'm aware of is one where we get the cell phone charge that goes into it.
And what is that money used for?
Generally for equipment.
Okay.
That's a capital projects fund.
And I'm asking,
it's got to be for dispatch
we talked
purposes.
about and if my numbers are off, correct me.
Right.
The $4 million, is it, for the new 800 megahertz radios, right?
Yeah.
And I had brought up in the general fund, capital projects, about why is not Act 51 paying for their fair share of the radios? Right. Why are not the different districts from the, not DPW, the
Did you
drain
get an
office?
opportunity to?
Yeah, so you'll, on the updated capital plan, those funding sources have been included as funding sources.
So it's not coming out of the general fund, so we.
Correct. There's been a reduction for that project.
Okay, did I miss that?
Okay, so if you could very quickly, from that original sheet to the newest one we got with regard to the capital plan, what was the change in dollar amount? Do you know?
The general fund contribution?
Yes.
It's pretty close to the same, because I included a $500,000 contingency amount in there.
Okay, so it did get reduced.
Yeah.
He added the contingency that we wanted. We wanted that emergency contingency.
I can reconcile that if that'll help you.
If it's $500,000 that we added, so there was $500,000 then that was reduced, but then
Yes.
added back. So this is what I'm trying to understand, that wasn't
Yes.
explained to me. So we did reduce to the appropriate funds. We reduced the general fund liability to these things coming out by $500,000, but yet we increased in emergency allotment.
Which we,
so if something
yes.
happens.
Correct.
Yes.
So
I'll reconcile that for you. That's not a problem.
Okay, because again, I want to go back and just make sure that the federal dollars that we're receiving for the radio system, the cellular fees, and the radio maintenance, that those fees that are coming in are help covering the cost of this $4 million above and beyond the other funds, such as the other departments of Act 51 dollars for the road department and different ones, because it's a lot of money, and if you don't have that, where would I find that 911 fees allocation part in the budget?
In the budget?
Yeah, where you're
The
spending.
911 fees for the cell phones?
What you're spending that
That's
on.
in the capital it's not in the budget because it's a capital projects fund. You'll find it in the annual report in the capital projects section. It's in the supplemental I'll get it to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, I don't see any other speakers on this. Chair Smith.
So I will say that I've heard plenty of conversation on the capital projects budget over the last 2 weeks. So it surprises me to not hear anyone come into play on a potential, number in mind on this. So, oh, I'm sorry, there was no speaker. So, I mean, there was.
I was waiting for a number to find out how much we're short on balancing the budget. He said, Leanne Joyce's first question out of the box was how much do we need to dip into our reserves, our reserve fund to balance the budget. When we have that number, we take that number and take it out of the capital improvement fund. That's my thought. And whatever that number is, that's what we'll take out of there. And we'll balance it without having to dip into our general fund. I mean, our emergency reserve. Yeah.
It just
Well,
says capital plan fund reduction. It doesn't specify IT
All right.
or non-IT. On the sheet I was given to go over. Go ahead, Commissioner Brown.
I'll yield.
Here's the answer to it.
All right.
Commissioner, the budget that was proposed to be adopted by the board was an $8.8 million use of fund balance to balance the budget between the revenues and expenditures.
Yeah, but after.
The capital request is $13.6 million. That was included in this budget, as well as an additional 3.5 was included in IT and facilities, which was previously included within the capital budget. So it's 17 point something million dollars that's included for capital within this budget.
But all right, thank you.
Commissioner Gillette.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the question was just answered. To actually balance this budget, essentially, we'd have to cut did you say $8.3 million?
8.8.
$8.8 million is the number we would need in order to actually balance this budget with incoming revenues. So I guess that's the number we need, and we have to ask ourselves the question, is it realistic to take that out of capital projects? If we're just taking it out to make it look good when we pass the budget, and then add it back in when we need the capital projects. So I think I'm willing to look at a new procedure or policy in dealing with capital projects, but I just want to make sure we're honest when we do it. So.
That was sort of, my thought process going into this was that we did that before next year so that everybody understood what the board was thinking going into next year about how much, fund equity, or, what we were hoping to achieve. Because I think it's late in the game to try to figure all that out now, but that was my thought process. Are you still?
That's all I have on this. I wish I
Okay.
had more, but I thought there was going to be more in-depth discussion on that. If there's not, I'm still gathering
Okay.
information.
Commissioner Leonetti.
Yeah, I think there's going to be more discussion, if I'm not mistaken, about how we transfer the funds, in a sense. But right now, remember this, there's $4 million that's going to be spent this year for sure on those radios. And those are going to be in place. I think that they told us, emergency management told us it's going to be in place by like April or June. So that's $4 million of the $17 million we're talking about. So that's going to definitely be spent this year. But I do agree with what the chairwoman said. I think this time here, we're going to have to just kind of look at cutting some stuff, maybe MSU, okay? But going forward, come up with some better ideas for next year. Again, and that's in part because we got a $4 million hit this year. That's all going to be spent. I think Steve had talked on some of these other things. You're not always spending, the $4 million. For example, you might spend $2 million of the $4 million. This time here, we're just going to have to take it on the chin because it's $4 million that's going to be put in place and spent before fiscal year 2019's over. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair Smith.
So $8.8 million would be needed to balance the budget, but that's not really our only concern, right? I mean, balance in the budget, we had a higher savings account, right? And we want to, I mean, generally speaking, the consensus from everybody is, 15 is the low, 20 is the high as far as general fund balance, right? And you don't want to have a 25%, fund balance sitting there, right? So I'll go back to what Deputy Delden has said, many times, is that although we're balancing the budget at this point to some extent, well, a lot of extent, off of general fund dollars, I don't know that we're getting outside of, I don't know how much we're getting outside of our comfort range yet. You know what I mean? I think our concern, we should certainly be concerned that we're looking at, I think, 17 million or something, 17 million in general capital fund monies being placed in the 19 budget. I'm not sure that number, we all know that number is not sustainable for many years to come. Steve has, projected a lowering amount, and we've discussed several times having a general stable fund of X amount of dollars per year. That capital projects will live within, I don't know, 10 million a year, right? And that will, keep our budget a little easier to understand. So it's not a big chunk, a little chunk, a big chunk. But I think the question is right now, and we've asked this several times before, and we've always seen it, that generally speaking, capital projects comes in at a number that's generally unattainable. I mean, there's no way to get $17 million worth of capital projects done. Jayco many times has told us that, with his budget in the past, at least, that's not, feasible. So the question is $17 million feasible? Where does it bring our fund balance down to if we did a $17 million, including an $8.8 million transfer? And what is that number that we would be, as a board? I mean, we've done it before. We've cut money out of a capital projects budget. And I mean, as far as I know, Steve, we're still carrying money over from last year into next year, right? Of that 12 or...
Yeah, a little bit.
Right.
Based on cash flow projections. Yeah, we're carrying over a little bit into next year to basically finish the Central Campus project.
Right. So, do we ever, okay, I know there was something that and I don't know exactly what it was, that they recently asked about all the capital money and where
I'm working
it's
on
at.
that. It's trying to get it in a more understandable format.
All right. And that may be, I mean, and not that that's, I don't mean to say it's a problem, because Steve's doing everything that we ask, so I'm not, but we're getting new numbers and different numbers and understanding things kind of at a late point of the game. So, I mean, we might be looking at those numbers on Thursday, even to kind of make a decision on whether we're going to fund the whole thing or whether we're going to fund 75% of it or 66% of it. And I will say this, whatever I vote on, even if we said 50% of the capital projects budget, it certainly leaves into play, and I don't think that finance could argue with that any time that they've come to us for a project that's there and needs to be done, that if there's not money, we look at funding it for them. So again, to Leon's point though, or Commissioner Drolet, we don't want to underfund it and then just keep pulling money back out of the general fund to make it look like we did something, but we didn't, right? So I don't know who has any more ideas on this, but I would
The only
recommend.
speaker is, did you want to speak again, Commissioner?
I just want a quick clarification, Madam Chair, and thank you. You mentioned, Chairman Smith, that we want to maintain a healthy fund balance, but we're not at a danger level at this point, even if we spent the whole $17 million and took another $8.7 million out of it. The question I have is, how many years in a row have we been going into the fund balance compared to when's the last year we added money to the fund balance? Does anybody know offhand, either Steve or Jen or anybody?
Well, just as a point of information, I asked my Jack that today, and he says he remembers 2006. Whether that's true or not, I don't know.
That's not true. That is no way, shape, or form true.
Yeah.
We had $59 million to put toward retiree health care in 2015. The fund balance back then was around $72 million, had built up for a number of years. Now, Commissioner Myjack is correct that in 2008, 2009, we had some, deficits, if you will. We've had some deficits for the last couple of years. I can put a schedule together. I mean, if you look through the annual report,
So
we've
Steve,
run surpluses, we've run deficits.
Steve, so even the last couple of years is your off-the-cuff estimate, essentially.
Pardon?
That we've run some deficits over the last couple of years is your off-the-cuff best guess.
Well, I know we have. We ran an $8 million
deficit
in 2017.
Okay.
I can't remember what it was
Right.
the year before, but I mean, it's easily attainable. It's in the annual report.
Okay. Well, thank you. What I guess I'm worried about is, yes, we're going to take a $4 million hit on the radios, but every year there's going to be a big hit of some sort. And if every year we keep going into the fund balance, saying that, well, this year we had the roof collapse. Well, this year we had the fire, and this year we had this. There's always going to be something. It may be sustainable this year, but the trend isn't good. And, at some point we're going to fall below where we're comfortable. And that's not going to really hurt us until we go through a recession. And a number of you have been on the board when we went in a recession. I haven't been, thankfully, but a number of you have been, understand what that is like and how quickly that fund balance can evaporate. So I don't have a solution on what we should do with the capital projects here. I'm open to whatever the board and the administration, can come to terms as how to deal with it. I understand that a lot of these projects have to be done, but I don't want us to lie to ourselves, and say that we're doing something because we move a few numbers around. We're going to deficit spending in good times, and we've been doing it for years. Let's be honest. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, in all fairness, I mean, one of the years we put a bunch of money away for retiree health care, we were doing a responsible thing. So there's a few years there. You might want to get with Steve and get a little background on what we were doing to cause that to, on paper, look like that.
Yeah, I can tell you in 2008, I'll just give you a quick synopsis. We did run a deficit of 7.3. Then we ran surpluses of 8.1, 14.8, 5.2, 22.1, 1.6, 3.6. Every year through 14. In 15, we had a deficit of 13 million. We transferred 29 million to the retiree health care program. So we would have had a surplus there as well. Now, we've run deficits the last 2 years, but primarily because of capital projects. 16 was about 10.6, and then last year was 8. So we had a number of good years there, so.
Okay, Commissioner Leonetti?
Thank you. Steve, I got a question for you. And I guess if this is the issue, we were talking one time, you had a chart and it showed us out, like, I think the number was something like, maybe it was like $39 million that we can expect over capital improvements out to like 2025. Do you remember that chart that you showed us a couple meetings ago?
Yeah, it was probably my 10-year projection.
Your 10-year projection,
Mm-hmm.
right. And then there was a question I had for you. I said, well, what happens if we averaged out giving you this much towards capital improvements?
Right.
And it was a baseline number, I think is what we talked about.
Right.
And it was like, I believe the number was 7.5 to
Right,
8.
we bumped that to 8.5 now.
Okay, 8.5.
Yeah, and we're still, I'll update you and give you a new projection, because we still maintain a fund balance of just about 21% for a number of years. Again, our debt service drops off starting in 2023. We get some relief there.
Okay.
As well.
So and I remember that meeting, and I remember your chart. Let me ask you, and then I'm just throwing this out there. 13 million's being asked. It's really 17 million. Okay, but like, if we gave you 8.5 now, 4 million of it's going to go towards those radios. So that leaves 4.5 million left for capital improvements for this year, I guess, right? I mean,
say that again, please.
Well, like, let's say we gave you 8.5 million, and I'm only going with what this discussion seems to be about. The discussion was, capital improvement reduction. So does that mean, the executive's asking for $17 million in capital improvements this
They're
year?
asking for a $12.5 million contribution from the general fund.
Correct.
12.5
of general fund
from the fund balance.
Right, from the fund balance. 4 million of it we know is going to go towards those radios. That's a big hit this year. No question about that. We don't have that. We may have a hit down the road, but not that big. And remembering looking at that chart, this year coming up is the worst. But what happens if we average it out? Remember we talked about that baseline? If we bumped it up to 8.5 million, if we just gave you 8.5 million for the next 10 years, all right, or whatever that number was, that's enough theoretically for you to meet the obligations of what we have on the plans for capital improvements. Is that correct?
Starting in 21.
In 21.
Yeah, I mean, we need a larger amount in 19 because of radios and things like that. So what the plan now says is in 19 and 20, we need a little bit more money than the 8.5. starting in '21, if we level it off at 8.5, that provides for about $4.5 to $5 million of new projects to come on the plan. As we know, and it's been discussed many times, when you get out to the third, primarily the fourth and fifth year, you know,
Right.
the plan says we're going to have $2.9 million of projects in 5 years. We know intrinsically that that's not going to happen. So if we level it out at $8.5 million, it may be years where we need more because something happens.
Right. No,
So it's a planning tool.
It's a planning tool, right? Well, again, you know, if you want to have some discussion or debate on it, I mean, you know, my position on it is, look, we're going to get a $4 million hit this year, so we got to take that into consideration. And so whatever number we're going to give them, you got to put that into play. If they're asking for $12.5 million, a third of it, well, it's about $3.5 is for IT, right? That's already accounted for, correct? Okay.
Yeah, there's $11.7 million of projects that are infrastructure related, buildings, radio system, et cetera. About $3.3 million for IT projects, system replacements, and those things that Jaco's discussed.
Okay. All right.
Rob, the
Okay,
recommended
Steve-
budget's 13.8.
want
The
this,
request
right.
in the recommended.
In the
budget.
recommended, that's before we've made changes.
Right.
But what you've recommended, though, is 13.8 in the budget that came to us. I mean, that's the budget we're voting on technically at the end of the day.
Yeah, the contribution, I think, was 13.
13.8. You're right.
Was it 13.8
So
or
if
I'll have to look.
if the budget you gave us is the budget we're voting on,
Mm-hmm.
are you going to be coming to requesting amendments to that before we, based on the changes that
Based
you?
on a new plan, I mean, we have a new capital plan. We could come for amendments after the beginning of the year or after you adopt it. I mean, it's kind of
I mean,
clunky making amendments between now and December 31st, but
okay, it's just through the course of the budget discussions, you've said, yeah, that number's wrong, that one's gotta be decreased by 122 and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're voting on is this original budget, right?
correct. I mean,
So we're not voting on all those
Point of
changes.
information,
Well, you
Madam
can
Chair.
make-
Are you saying that all the changes that they acknowledge that they're going to have to change and reduce, we're not doing that prior to adoption?
That's what I'm trying to establish over here. That's exactly what I'm doing, is establishing that. Okay. So, Steve, is it your opinion that when you give us these changes, that's being incorporated in, and then when we vote, we're voting on it with those changes? Or is it your opinion that we're voting on the budget you gave us a couple months ago, and that those changes will need to be done to it?
to incorporate the new plan, I would say we need to make amendments after 2019. I guess you could talk among yourselves. If you're talking about other decreases in appropriations, you could
Right,
change
you're
those
right.
as
But
well.
if there's, yes, but if there are mistakes in this, and he knows about those mistakes, wouldn't we want him to say, this is an amendment to that budget that you might want to make because that number's wrong? Even if that's our job to make the amendments, during the discussion, there were several items that were wrong, and he was even issuing a revised sheet. So, okay, so the understanding at this point is no, what we're voting on is this budget here.
Or any amendments made.
Unless it's amended.
Unless it's amended by us. Were you?
Point of information. Steve, anything that the Board of Commissioners or any individual commissioner may make a recommendation for a change into this proposed budget is incumbent upon the Board of Commissioners to make that change. But through the deliberation process that we've gone through, and you've acknowledged that there's things that have to be changed because department head says they didn't need this or they didn't need that, that should be done prior to us. We should be adopting the number that you're going to present with those corrections made through this process, no?
I mean, I've given you a capital plan. We could make a number of amendments, I guess, to the recommend, but I would suggest, it would seem more proper to me with the new information. I can give you a new page, but it would seem.
Years past, we've made those changes prior to adoption, other than if the Board of
But
Commissioners.
last year, you took the capital plan funding out.
Right, but years
during
prior
this
to that, if there
process.
was things that you found in there that were incorrect, you changed those prior to us finally adopting, because what's gonna happen is that if we're gonna go back to the record and we're gonna make those changes that you acknowledge that should be changed, we're going back to you to make those changes anyway. So why would you not present it to the changes that you agreed to? So yes, those have to be reduced, this has to be changed. Why would that not be the final copy for us to make the adoption of what we've gone through?
We could do that. Now, if you're going to vote it on Thursday, that might be a little more difficult. If you're going to, if you want us to reproduce a whole document.
Okay.
So if you're voting a
Deputy
week from
Del,
Thursday.
did you want to say something? Please come up. We did used to get sheets of paper, and we haven't in this budget cycle.
Just,
Go ahead.
thank you, Commissioner Kleinfeld. Just a little commentary here relative to the capital plan. Whatever that final number is, $12 or $13 million, that's what it is. I mean, I think we have spent probably more time this year as a commission and administrative office talking about capital plans and how to move forward with it than any other topic, and that's not a bad thing. But whatever the number is, it is, and those are projects that we deem need to be done in 2019. Now, to some of the other commissioners' concerns, if you want to make the bottom line look better, make it 50 or 65 or 70% of whatever that final number is. But it's not, well, it won't be a transparent budget. And all we'll do is push those projects into 2020, the ones that we have to.
Point
and
of
then that
information.
and then that number is going to look higher. And then the question will still be asked, can't we get to an $8 or $8.5 million number every single year? Remember, we're living in the best of times right now in terms of property tax revenue. We're living in the best of times. We have made conscious decisions to spend some of our 42% fund balance in recent years to bond for our retiree health care unfunded liability. And this board made a conscious decision to spend millions of dollars and put it into capital projects because during the Great Recession, we put many projects on hold because you didn't have the money to fund capital projects. And we're still playing catch up from that Great Recession. And if you start cutting the capital project now, there's going to be a compounding effect. And when there really is a market correction and the tax revenues stop coming in, we're going to be in dire straits in terms of our facilities. But if you want to make the bottom line look great, if you want to stay above 20% fund balance, but it's okay that the roof leaks, or we're still dealing with heating systems that were put on these roofs in 1968, then do that. I'm cautioning this board that we need to address our facilities. We're not asking to build new ones, we're asking to address our facilities because we're still behind from the Great Recession.
Madam Chair,
Okay,
point of information on that.
wait, hold on just a second. What he's doing is he's referring to the capital outlay stuff. What you were asking.
No, my stuff is capital outlay too. The finance chair concurred that there was $500,000 of reductions of stuff that was agreed upon that are not happening, and yet it's going to be put into an emergency fund of $500,000. But yet, my understanding, that's not happening. We're going to have to do that after we adopt this budget. And I'm saying, why would we adopt a budget if we know it's wrong and not support it with the information that you've presented to us? We knowing that it's not correct. That makes no sense to me whatsoever.
All of those numbers in any capital plan that we've ever submitted are our best guesstimates. Until we go out for competitive bids and we open up those bids, those numbers change. You know they do.
You are correct, Deputy Executive, but the reality is he acknowledged that there's $500,000 of reductions that are not part of what you're talking about, that we're going to put into a category of emergency repairs of $500,000, a new line item in there for that, yet we're not going to do that when we vote for the budget. I don't understand why we would not do those things right now. That's what I'm getting to. I'm not talking about anything else that we may change or want to change. I'm talking about stuff we all acknowledge and are in concurrence. Why would we vote on something we know that's not right? You see what I'm trying to say?
I think we're all a little bit confused on this side here, so I'm sorry.
I might even be able to clarify even further. So he's talking about capital. Steve, you gave us this budget reconciliation. You said A is, that's for 18.
Those things are all 18.
They're all 18.
Correct.
Got it. Okay, so it's different than what you're speaking to, and I understand. So you're saying we're not going to approve a budget that has that 500,000 contingency, unless And I guess unless we make a motion to put in whatever the capital fund amount is,
I think when I provide you the reconciliation between the first capital plan and the new capital plan, you'll see what the reduction in the general fund requirement is gonna be.
we're appropriating a lump sum, so.
Yeah, you're reporting,
but
it's 13,584,000, which is in the recommend.
But,
It's something less than that.
right, so that's not in the budget. That's in our capital outlay plan that they gave us, that they'll be given the quarterly on. And what he's saying is 500,000 of that is going to be an emergency contingency. So it's not in our budget because we don't have capital outlay in the budget that way. We do a lump sum. Does that
Correct.
clarify?
What we have in the budget is a line item in transfers for whatever corresponds with the capital plan. At this point, that amount
Which
reconciles with
apparently,
the old capital plan.
which apparently that was determined before I got on. I disagree with it. I think the entire rest of the budget, the numbers are what the numbers are. Employees cost what they cost.
Correct.
And all of that. That's the one area that I don't think that. But that's the way we have it in there. So I don't see any more speakers.
Madam Clerk, how you doing back there?
Okay, and then where's that sheet of paper? I'm sitting here playing with my papers. That sheet of paper. Where is it? All right. Okay, we have 3 more things. I don't know where they came from. I don't know whose idea they were. So if people don't speak up, then we'll just move right along, okay? So the first is reduce executive office contract services by 50,000. And does anybody remember that? Or what that was about? Okay, the next one is reduce planning and economic development's contract services by 30,000. Does anybody remember? Okay. If you have rationale that we don't know about, if you guys could have it at the table for Thursday, if there is rationale for these, because I don't know, right? Because I'm just going off of what I was given today. Okay, and then the third one is reduce parks capital outlay by 50,000. Does anybody know where that one came from? That's all I was given. So that's the problem. I was given this list when I got here today. This is what to go over. So if there is more information, what I'd like is that information be included so we know what it is that we're debating.
When we talked about the executive office, the 50,000 was that when we asked what that was for, we were told for emergencies, or in case something happened, and I know we kind of discussed if there wasn't a necessary line item, should that be in there? That's point of information. I remember we discussed that.
Okay, Commissioner Drillette.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Commissioner Lucido is correct in that recollection, and it may be something we end up debating. So maybe it's something we talk about now, or maybe it's something we're not prepared to talk about right now. But I did have another amendment that I was intending to bring forward that apparently is not on the list.
I was going to ask about miscellaneous. So.
Oh, okay. I
so
can wait.
I'm sorry, with respect to those 3, if there is background that you guys remember, like Liz just, if you have it, why don't we just get it?
And Executive Deldon's here. My understanding for the 50,000, initially it wasn't clear what it was for, but my understanding now is it's for an optimization study. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. That's one of our goals
Okay.
for next year. We have $122,000 in our contracted service budgets. $110,000 is recurring every single year. It gives us about $12,000 to do things with. That certainly is not enough to take on an initiative, or if we wanted to bring on a consultant like the board has done this year with budget, we don't have money to do that types of stuff. It just gives us a little bit more flexibility. But one of the things that we did back in 2014, The board approved a space utilization study only of our downtown campus. It wasn't a countywide. It was after the fire. And, but now that we are talking about moving the Mount Clemens Health Department possibly into the Verkulen building and abandoning the Mount Clemens Health Department because it was built in the 1950s. It doesn't look it from the facade, but it's bad space. We have the old probate court that is just a very poor and inadequate facility, and it's not handicap accessible. So we have a number of buildings, and some of the things I've heard from the commissioners is instead of building more buildings, let's look at what we have and can we eliminate some buildings? Because one of the things that we're not really good at is if the building sits idle for too long, somebody somewhere in the county is going to want to reoccupy that space, and then we find ourselves dumping good money into a bad building just because somebody needs some extra space. So it's for those types of things or anything else that may come up.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Did you already speak, or were you on to speak again?
I'm under miscellaneous or something.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I'll get back with you. Chair Smith.
Steve, the parks money, doesn't that come out of like a special revenue fund or something? That's not new general fund money, is it?
The general fund, we have a budget of contribution of $86,000 from the general fund. The general fund has given or provided funding to the park fund for a long, long time. It's significantly less nowadays than it was before.
Right. Is this an
So-
increase, though, in the general fund contribution
No.
from something?
No.
Okay.
No, we put
Right.
50,000 in there. It's another contingency for capital, specific for that facility.
So I do have to ask you this, though. Doesn't F&O cover that building, or is that something separate because of the
Well, it's separate, and so since there's a separate funding source that's providing fund balance, there's about $500,000 of unrestricted fund balance in that fund. So that the 50,000 we have built in for contingency is basically coming out of the fund balance. We don't spend it every year. Again, it's one of these contingency items, just like we have in the capital plan, but specific to the park.
Right. I just wanted to remember what
Yeah,
it was.
so if you reduce that, it wouldn't necessarily reduce the general fund contribution at all.
Thank you.
Okay, and the planning and economic development contract services by 30,000, I wasn't here for that meeting. So, does anybody have any memory? Planning and economic development contract services by 30,000. Okay, if nobody can remember it and Crystal doesn't know what it is, then we.
I remember it.
You remember it?
Yep. It was an increase for contract services that was similar to with the executives, that I don't think they had a necessary plan for at that moment. So I don't know if you know what their plan for. I think that's what I remember. I don't know, but that was just a conversation that was had, I believe, during JP's
I believe
budget.
that was, he gave a list of what made up his contract services. I believe it was Commissioner Brown that brought that up. And it was, there's a specific item on there for 30,000. I can't remember what it was for, but there was a specific item that Commissioner Brown asked JP about, so.
Okay, all right, that's between you guys. I wasn't even here for that, so. Okay, so lastly, we are moving on to miscellaneous, and I'm going to call on Commissioner Gillette.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be offering another amendment when we vote on the budget. And that amendment deals with the appropriation under general fund for outside agencies and associations. It's on page C57 of our budget. If commissioners recall correctly, when that part of the budget was presented, it was to join outside organizations and associations, the 8 Mile Boulevard Association, the Detroit Regional Commerce, Regional Chamber of Commerce, the Literacy Program, the St. Clair Conservation District, Stream Gauge, and a bunch of other outside associations. And it was, we found out during that presentation that the funding that we used to provide for something called Literacy Program, I don't know if that was a formal name or just the what was done, that organization apparently no longer exists, that literacy program. So the executive decided to put that money that used to be appropriated there into one Macomb. And it got me thinking about that whole list of agencies. many of which I have no idea what they do. I don't know what the Stream Gauge Association is that we spend $88,000 on or $86,000 to join. I don't know. Maybe it's the best use of funds in the county. But what I'd like to do, and other things like the St. Clair Satellite Conservation District, I know what they do, but I haven't had them reviewed in a while. So I guess what my amendment is going to do is set the $816,000 aside in a special fund so that we can review these associations and determine if this is the best use of our association dollars. Some of these organizations, my understanding, have not come in and made a presentation maybe in many years. We have the zoo has come forward and made a presentation. The DIA has come forward and made a presentation. Commissioners know what they do, but I don't know what some of these do. And I think that we should review them, get a better idea, and find out if that is the list that we want to be joining. And I think that's something that we have a duty to review. So that would be my amendment. I hope it's supported. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Commissioner. No commissioners for questions? Okay, any other miscellaneous amendments that people want to bring up right now? Very good. Okay, we're moving on from that agenda item then. And I didn't think we needed a motion to receive and file. The minutes should just reflect that we discussed the budget. Proclamations, A and B. Moved by Carabelli. Is there support? Support by Romano, and that is 100th anniversary of Frank and Rewald and Son Incorporated, and 100th anniversary of Bednar's Fine Furniture. Thank you. Please vote. Motion passes 11-0. New business. Is there any new business? Chair Smith.
Just real quick, I just wanted to mention yesterday was a groundbreaking in my district in Chesterfield for a new veterans facility. Chair Smith I might have stole his thunder on this one, but it's supposed to be veterans facility for about 130 some veterans, and it should be built hopefully within a year or so. And it's the first in the Metro Detroit area. And the majority of veterans live in the Metro Detroit area, and I was told expect more to come. So we're really happy to have that in Chesterfield. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Duge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to thank everybody for their support on the proclamation for the Ukrainian Cultural Center. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Smith.
Thank you. Two things. Phil, you mentioned the veterans thing. I do want to point out that we were notified of that veterans thing from the state and no other place. just want you all to know that that's still an issue that we're working on. And Marilyn has been talking with me and we're trying to get that the notification of what's going on in the county a little bit better. I just want to talk real quick to capital projects. I cannot remember a year where we've given every dollar that they want for capital projects. And they've always seemed to make it work. This year they came to us for a little extra, but they still rolled over some extra. We're going to get conversations like this. We're going to get calls from people saying, well, we're just making a fake budget. Well, we're not making a fake budget if we don't keep acquiescing to increase decrease our general fund by increasing capital projects. I don't know what that number is. I mean, 8.8 million breaks us even. Do we need to break even to keep within the 20%? No, but we have never, I can't remember the last time we've given, I don't think that we ever have given them the number that they've looked for in capital projects. And quite honestly, it's been explained to us several times that they always ask for more than they could possibly do. And I know for a fact in a few budgets there's money put in there, a lot of just in cases. So I just want to point that out. This is our budget, right? I mean, we don't call any departments and tell them how to do their job. I don't expect us to be told how to do ours and what we're here for. We are looking at keeping a fund balance that's right and that's reasonable at the expense of maybe pushing a project to the next year. All of these aren't emergencies. They are things that need to be done. There are emergencies that we certainly would always wish to fund, or will fund, but sometimes things have to be pushed off. So I can't imagine that they would expect for 1 second, even though they'll say that they expect us to fund 100% of their capital projects in something that we've never done before. And we know that that's not, in general, going to be accomplished. Second, we have worked on a better process for putting the capital money outside of the general fund, but in a non-departmental capital projects outlay line item. So it's not confused with capital projects, but it can't be moved until it's voted on by the board. I've had discussions with Steve on funding the under $35,000 to a certain extent, so that you know, taking a percentage of whatever we give them for total and put it into the capital projects budget, where they can use it for anything under $35,000 without having to come to us for that. That being said, they've also agreed that reporting is a key item on all of this trust issues and everything that we're going on with, and just regular general good government, right? To be able to, for us to get reports on what's being spent where, and the capital projects is where we're starting. So we do have some pretty good consensus, I think, with the executive's office and the finance department on quarterly reporting on capital projects, project-based, and, you know, year-to-date with that. So that being said, I think that next year we're looking to be in a lot better place as far as being informed on where our budget actually stands quarter to quarter. So anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I think we had a good meeting. Yeah, see you in church.
Anybody? All right, public participation. Seeing none, we'll end public participation. Motion to adjourn by Duje, supported by Drollet. I picked on them today. I had to give it back to them somehow.
Hey, I will point out that our